This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning and welcome to the London Assembly Environment Committee. This is the November meeting, and we've got a set of expert guests who've joined us today, but we've got one or two bits of the agenda to go through before we come to our guests. I would like to welcome everybody here today. Members of the public may wish to follow London Assembly on X. Please use the hashtag Assembly Environment for this meeting. Can I just remind everybody to put their phones on silent, and if you leave it on vibrate, please don't put it in front of your microphone because it will be picked up. And also, can I just remind everyone that when you are speaking to the microphone, if you could position it so that it picks up your voice. That might mean that you need to move it closer to you. Please do not pick up the microphone by the gooseneck. Please pick it up by its base, otherwise it tends to break. The main item of today is going to be a discussion of waste and recycling, and of course we've heard all the jokes about Assembly members talking rubbish, but we are going to take our lives in our hands and do that. Before we begin, I'm just going to ask the clerk, Jack Booth, if you could confirm if there are any apologies for today's meeting.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies for absence from Assembly Member Devenish, for whom Assembly Member Rogers is attending as a substitute.
You're very welcome, Assembly Member Rogers. Thank you. The second item of business is the declarations of interest, which are found on pages 1 to 4 in your agenda pack. Could I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2? And have members got any other interests that they wish to declare in any aspect of the agenda? I am actually going to declare that I sit as one of the 8 councillors on the Western Riverside Waste Authority. In the Declaration of Interest, you will see that I'm listed there as being a councillor as well as an Assembly member. And the reason that I would like to have that recorded is we are joined by a guest from the Western Riverside Waste Authority who will be one of our experts this morning. I don't consider that to be a pecuniary interest of any description, because I'm not remunerated for sitting on that body, but just for transparency, I think I'd like that recorded. The next item on the agenda is the minutes, which are on pages 5 to 54. Can we agree the minutes of the Environment Committee meeting that was held on the 18th of October? Are those agreed? Thank you. And I will sign those as a correct record. The next item is the summary list of action, which is on pages 55 to 78. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings and the additional correspondence that we've received in connection with that?
Noted.
Thank you. And finally, we come to our main item of business, which is going to take up most of this morning, on waste and recycling. And I'd now like to welcome our guests. And I'd like to welcome Rachel Espinosa, who is the Deputy General Manager from the Western Riverside Waste Authority, which I was just mentioning. We also have Matthew Homer, who's employed by the London Borough of Islington as the Waste and Strategy Manager. We've also been joined by Jemilah Bailey from the Greater London Authority and is the Policy and Programme Manager for Waste and Recycling. We also have been joined by Phil Roche, who's the Head of Commercial from Biocollectors. You're very welcome as well. We have Wayne Hubbard, who is the Chief Executive Officer of ReLondon. In its days of yore, used to be called LWAB, the London Waste and Recycling Board. And last but very much not least, we also have Ray Parmenter, who is Head of Policy and Technical from the Chartered Institute of Waste Management. Thank you very much to all of you for coming this morning. And as is traditional, I'm afraid you're going to be subject, first of all, to some questioning by me. So I'm going to start with the GLA and also with ReLondon. And I'd just like to start with the headline about the current recycling rates. They're less than 33% in London, 32.7%, which is well below the Mayor's target of 45%, and they've been flatlining pretty much for the last 10 years. I don't think we've seen much increase since 2013. What are the reasons behind this? And I'm going to start with you, Jemilah, first, and then move to Wayne.
Yeah, so I think we know that the recycling rate in London has stagnated over the last few years and hasn't increased. We do know that that's kind of a national trend in terms of the national trend on recycling rates for household waste has actually gone down by 1.4%, I think. So London is doing better than the national average. So I think there is a national hampering of recycling rates that need to improve. So I think obviously we would like to be doing better and working towards the Mayor's target. So yeah, I think there are a range of reasons why we haven't actually got to achieve that at the moment. So I can go into kind of things that we're doing about that, but I think there are a number of challenges. So that the target was obviously meant to be very stretching and ambitious, and we knew that, and there were a range of things that we would need to do to get there. We have had a number of challenges that are hampering our progress on that. So I think
really looking here at the reasons for the flatlining rather than how we're going to fix it. Those we will hopefully come on to. But perhaps if I ask you, Wayne, as well, if you'd like to come in on this. Why is it flatlining here? And Jemilah has just contextualised it and said, why is it flatlining in the rest of the country? Or at least in England, because I think Wales is doing something different.
I think, I think a combination of COVID, driver shortages, we've had that as a problem, but mainly I think the problem has been, in recent years at least, the delay in implementation of consistent recycling. So across the country, you have, or simpler recycling as it's now called, across the country you've had a delay in investment in additional waste infrastructure. So now that announcement has been made by government and those blockages should start to unblock, I would expect and anticipate that over the course of the next few years, London's recycling rate and the rest of the country will start to go back up again as we see new systems implemented. The big problem has been essentially the government have talked about providing funds under new burdens to provide for things like additional food waste collections, for example, and no authority is going to implement new recycling collections unless it gets that new burden funding. I think actually, Matthew, you've fallen foul slightly of this, haven't you? Because you've introduced recycling, food waste recycling or food waste collection systems, and you're not going to be compensated under new burdens. Maybe I'm wrong there, but so lots of authorities have taken the view that they're not going to do that investment. So you've seen across the country a flatlining in recycling rates. I also should say that...
Sorry, can I just be clear then? You're saying the main reason for it flatlining is because the government hasn't been making announcements rather than there being any other reasons why recycling may have flatlined in London?
Over the last few years, definitely, yes, I would say that's the case.
Because there was a distinct increase up until about 10 years ago.
Yeah, but so from a Velo base to around about 30-odd%, and then it's flatlined, and I think it will go up to around about, maybe Jemilah's got a view, but I think it will go up to around about the 40s over the next couple of years as we start to see new food waste and other simpler recycling systems introduced in London. London does pretty well, I think, I have to say. The comparison between London and other regions, I think, is not a very good benchmark. If you compare London with other cities, it's kind of middling. If you compare London with other international cities, the best information that we have is London does pretty well in terms of comparing London with big mega cities like New York, etc. So, but I think we'll get to that 40-odd-ish% as these blockages are unblocked. And then we'll see where we go from there, in terms of household at least.
So do you think the Mayor's target of 45% by 2025, which is, pretty much just around the corner, do you think that's achievable?
I think that's going to be very challenging, but no, I think we're going to see that. We're going to see rates of about that, there or thereabouts, over the next couple of years, I think.
What do you think, Jemilah? Do you think we can get to that 45% by 2025?
I I think it's an ambitious target. I think it's still, we know that, I think I'll come on to other challenges I think that are also affecting London's recycling rate, but I think the delays to the national legislation reforms have really hampered that. But I think there's still challenges in implementing that. Quite a few of those are not actually coming in for a couple of years, so there's time for that to build up. So there is still, we still need to have that come through. And I think we know then that on top of that, you need behaviour change and cultural shifts to actually make sure that people are actually using those services. So I think the kind of framework that we need to get up to those rates is being put in place now, but the timescale for that to actually take effect and actually have those recycling rates start to increase.
So people often talk about behaviour change and cultural shift, but I wonder how we're going to effectively make that happen. Are we actually giving people enough information, for example, about how to recycle? I mean, do you think that's something that the mayor, the boroughs, or even the waste authorities should be putting more resource into?
Definitely. So I think we know that, and part of the challenges around increasing those recycling rates is communication and action. But I think for London specifically, due to the fact that it is a kind of dense urban area, it's the number of we have a huge number of flatted properties that are being built, and we know that those are really difficult to service, and that they're more difficult for people in those communal properties or flatted properties find it more difficult to recycle or more challenging. So we know that recycling rates are difficult there. So I think, we need to recognise that, and I think that is one of the reasons why London's trend is has been flatlining, and I think it's going to be an increasing challenge in the future, and we need to do more, especially to get people to actually change that culture. So I think we definitely do need to be doing more around communications. I think that was raised by the Public Accounts Committee, and something that we raised in our responses to the consultations to the legislation, and something that we know that we need to do more on. So, but I think it's and there also needs to be ways of getting those communications targeted specifically to the different types of properties. So I think we'll come on to flats later, but I think there are lots of challenges.
We'll come on to
there.
Flats very shortly. My colleague, Assemblymember Rogers, is going to ask some very specific questions about flats, but I'm just going to stay away from flats, because otherwise he might get quite cross with me, because he's very like that. He gets very angry.
Could I just also add, because I think we have talked about the trends in London flatlining, but I think obviously that hides variation between the boroughs, because we obviously have 33 different boroughs and a number of different waste authorities, and we know that, like Wayne mentioned, COVID and the national legislation delays, and also like the cost of living crisis, we know that that's had an impact on people's behaviours in shopping and people being at home as well. But we know that there have been service changes implemented, like boroughs like Westminster who've introduced food waste and things like that. We've had quite good increases in the recycling rate, so we do know that there is opportunities to improve that, and there's been more challenges around especially things like industrial action, which has had quite large impacts on specific boroughs. We know like Bexley's has dropped by 10% over the last few years, which has been quite huge. So I think there are a number of challenges that in that, but I think that shows that we do have opportunity to increase those recycling rates, and we have been making progress in some areas.
Obviously, a lot of the boroughs are tied into particular contracts that go for which, for good financial reasons, you might want to continue with for a number of years. So the East London Waste Authority, I think, has a contract that runs until 2027. Western Riverside, obviously, I know very well, has one that runs until 2032. So sometimes that can make changing arrangements difficult. Is that something that is a challenge that the GLA is able to comment on?
Yeah, so obviously the Mayor has powers around kind of overseeing contract changes and reviewing those when individual waste authorities or boroughs are actually going out to review those, procure new contracts. So obviously when they have long contracts, but the Mayor's powers only go as far as making sure that we can make changes that aren't implementing that huge amount of additional cost or challenges to those boroughs or waste authorities. So that can be a challenge. We do still try to work closely with those waste authorities and make sure that we can build in opportunities to deliver the Mayor's targets. But obviously it means that there is only a challenge or an opportunity for the Mayor to intervene when some of those contracts come up. and we only have the chance to do that at the point which those contracts are being procured, and not beyond that. So it's definitely an issue, and I think we've seen that specifically around food waste in terms of bringing in those new services and the challenges of doing that within existing contracts and additional costs that can add on to local authority contracts.
So I'll just come back to Wayne momentarily then, because we've started off by saying we need behaviour change and a cultural shift. Jemilah is saying that the point at which the GLA can perhaps give support and advice, particularly around food waste in contracts, is at the point of a contract change. Do you think that the issues around behaviour change and improving communications is something that can also be incorporated into a contract when it's being changed and perhaps improved? Because, you know, one of the issues that we come up against all the time is contaminated recyclate, because people don't realise that for some reason that putting babies' nappies into a recycling bag is going to contaminate it. I can't see how anyone could think that it wouldn't, but apparently that happens. How can we not only implement new contracts, but then get better compliance, if you like, from people actually understanding what they should be doing?
Well, I mean, I'm in danger of talking about flats if I go too much into this.
Try and speak generally.
I will speak generally. From our flats research, and then moving into the generality, we were able to evidence some common sense things. We were able to evidence common sense. Common sense is obviously something that you think, well, that's obvious, but having the evidence for it is really useful. So good recycling services are a product of residents having the knowledge of how to use it and when to take part in that service, the motivation to do so, and then the ease of being able to participate in the service. So knowledge, motivation and ease are the three key components of any successful recycling service, whether that be a curbside service or a communal service. So yes, clearly knowing when and how to participate in your service and what to put in your service is absolutely a key component, an essential key component of having a successful recycling scheme. So any contract that doesn't address that potentially is going to have to address that at some point in the future, maybe at extra cost. So I would totally agree with the with that, and we can evidence that and clearly articulate how having having residents with good knowledge of a scheme can increase not just your recycling rate, but to your point, reduce contamination, which saves cost and actually also increases your recycling rate, because you're not throwing good recyclate away because it's been contaminated by contra materials.
And so what are the challenges about the non-household recycling rates, which are currently higher than the household recycling rates, but running at 48%? How could we increase that, do you think?
I'm
going to go back to Jemilah.
Okay, well, I mean, I know, again, that simpler recycling will help with that, because one of the key measures is having consistent, I'm going to use that word, recycling for non-household municipal waste as well. And the government seems to think that will raise non-household recycling from the mid-40s, 50s to around about, what did we say it was?
55-ish, I think it was.
Yeah, to about the 70s and 80s. So there's going to be a significant rise over the next few years. So having consistent recycling schemes in place will enable commercial waste to rise significantly. There are some challenges with that in relation to municipal authorities. The timings are challenging, because the timing of moving from household municipal and non-household municipal are different. There'll be procurement issues, so buying stuff in the procurement pipeline. All the local authorities in the UK are going to do this, as well as commercial operators. So you can imagine there's going to be some big difficulties and challenges. However, the top line figure is that there will be services in place for businesses as well as for residents in England, and that is going to increase recycling significantly.
Before I come back to Jemilah, actually, I'm just going to ask Ray. We talked about the Mayor's 2025 target of 45% for domestic waste. There's actually a mayoral target of 65% for the combined municipal waste overall. Do you think that is achievable now that we've finally got the indication from government as to what directions we're all going to be going in, either domestic or non-domestic, but municipal?
Is that to me or to...
No, it's to Ray.
sorry.
I thought we'd bring in
I
Ray.
thought it was, yeah. I think you need to bear in mind that the Mayor's target, I believe, is 2025, is it?
2025 for the
45%,
domestic,
yeah.
but I think the 65% is slightly further back in
Yeah.
time.
It's the implementation dates which are going to probably be the spanner in the works, if you like, because the implementation dates for household waste is not until 2026,
Yes.
but for business waste is 2025. Whether they're going to come early enough for those targets to be met is probably going to be a tall ask, I would think. Just looking at, coming back to a point that Wayne was making about comparators for London, the best comparator I could find was Liverpool, which is around 23.6 the last time I looked. So you're doing better than Liverpool.
I think we're doing better than Birmingham as well,
Yeah,
but we're not
doing
doing as
Birmingham as well.
as well as Manchester.
No, Manchester's doing very well, actually. But looking at the range of recycling performance through the London boroughs, there are some boroughs which are performing quite well, well above the national average. Can't remember which ones they were now, but we've got the figures here somewhere. Ealing was one of them, I think. So if you can replicate that, and again, the danger of risking in going into flats recycling, from Nick's point of view, that's the challenge for, I think, any big city is trying to get those recycling figures up for those types of accommodations, because a lot of the housing stock, particularly the older flats, are quite old. They were designed in a time when recycling wasn't really a thing. I think it was even a word in the Oxford English Dictionary. And you've got to try and retrofit recycling systems into those kinds of buildings. It's a difficult ask. But going back to my days at Veolia, when I used to work there for many years, we used to contribute to many of the planning consultations and one thing and another. One of the things we saw as an issue is trying to get the planning system to recognise that you need to build recycling infrastructure into the building from the outset, not as an afterthought, which is often the case with a lot of the buildings which are going up around London at the moment. So there's lots of challenges, as Jemilah says, but I think the dates do, coming back to what I said just now, the dates don't align, the stars don't really align at the moment.
Well, we did, of course, have all of that building it in when we had the Code for Sustainable Homes, but my colleagues must get quite cross with me referring to something that very sadly was scrapped, but the code actually ensured that there was space left for recycling as well as other aspects relating to renewables and so on and so forth. I'm going to come back to, thanks for that, Ray, that was very helpful. I'm going to come back to Wayne. What do you consider to be ReLondon's role in supporting increases in recycling rates across London?
Okay, so I mean, ReLondon was established with a number of objectives, one of which was to promote and encourage as far as possible within ReLondon waste reduction and recycling. And to that extent, and that covers all of waste rather than just the municipal element. And we offer 3 programmes facing local authority audience, citizens and business audience, and all of those obviously come together. So we support, for example, circular economy businesses who provide services to other businesses and predominantly to citizens, like, for example, Library of Things, Olio, Kitsch, talking of food waste, those kinds of businesses, to help citizens reduce and recycle their waste. We also support local authorities, and we do a lot of work, primarily research work, evidence-based research work, looking at the factors in London that are very specific to dense urban environments. So we've done work on contamination and the cost of contamination. We've done work on flats, particularly. We've got a flats recycling package. We did a first phase and a second phase of work. And we offer local authorities webinars and one-to-one help if that's what they want on those issues, on implementing the outcome of the work that we've done. And we also help them with some policy issues as well. So we're helping at the moment provide support to local authorities responding to the simpler recycling consultations to iron out some of these issues that might cause difficulties in the transition to simpler recycling. And we offer one-to-one surgeries for local authorities to drop in and talk to us. So what we do is we kind of take good practice from around London, and we're able to disseminate, share, and offer practical implementation help to that. That has to be funded by somebody, of course, and I know we're going to talk about.
Well, I'll come on to funding in a minute. How do you decide where you are going to make your focus on specific councils or on specific areas of the waste and recycling landscape? How do you make those decisions? Is that after the research or by looking at what's being done elsewhere?
It kind of depends. So on specific issues that affect London, clearly flats and communal living is a the single most important issue, I would suggest, in cracking London's recycling rate. And so when we were thinking about who to partner with to do that work, then clearly we were looking at local authorities who were both willing to work with us, and secondly who had significant estates of significant recycling flats properties for us to kind of work with. So that would be, Lambeth, Tower Hamlets, those kinds of Islington, those kinds of boroughs.
Do you engage with boroughs who are doing a lot of flatted developments, or do you engage with their planning teams? For example, in Wandsworth in July, the planning committee turned down a development changing a couple of flats into a 13-bed HMO because the waste facilities, well, there just really weren't any, and forced the people who were proposing the conversion to come back with some proper plans, and it was on a main high road, so it would have resulted in lots of waste flowing out all over the pavement.
Yeah.
There are many examples of that. Do you engage with planning?
Yes,
authorities?
We've worked closely with Tower Hamlets actually to develop a planning policy on a supplementary planning guide, I think it's called, on waste and recycling. So there is that document. I think it's available on our website. I can certainly make it available after this meeting. I can find out the precise
Perhaps
document.
we can follow up with.
And then on the other point you make about flats on the high road and on the high street. So our next piece of research that we're doing now is called FLASH, which stands for Flats Above Shops. And again, it's part of this thing that is very typical of dense urban environments and big cities, not just the estates, which to a certain extent are, I wouldn't say easier, but less challenging than dealing with flats above shops. Flats above shops have multiple challenges. There are, I don't know the percentage, but significant percentage of London's flatted properties, or more than just 1 or 2%, probably 10 or so percent, maybe even higher, are above shops. And they'll all be in different locations with different access, different issues around collection. So getting consistent, engaged citizens to be able to recycle in those situations is another real problem for cities like London, which we're attempting to do some work on and provide a toolkit in the same way as we've done with flatted properties.
Yes, I mean, we looked at Milan, which of course is quite flatted as well, and they apparently seem to have managed to move further on this. But what I just wanted to come to now, which you touched on very briefly, is what are ReLondon's sources of funding and how have these changed over time?
Okay, so when we were established, we were established in the GLA Act 2007, and at that time we were given a large initial grant from government of 60 million, and at that time there was very much an agreement around all the stakeholders, so the boroughs and the then mayor Boris Johnson, or became mayor in 2008, obviously, when our started, the London Waste and Recycling Board was initialised. There was agreement amongst stakeholders that one of the things we should focus on was capital, was infrastructure. So a large amount of money was made available to that end, and the London Development Agency through the Mayor, promised 24 million, of which only 9 ultimately was made available to us. And then I think over the course of the next few years we had the austerity, some money was taken away from ReLondon, and then we had a final settlement from DEFRA in the 2011-2015 spending review, and at that point, from that point on, we've received no further funding directly as way of a grant from central government. So the link seems to have been broken at that point, and I think that entirely was to do with austerity and the government of the day deciding it was a London issue and that our funding should be a London issue. And as far as I'm aware, I'm pretty sure, in fact, I know this to be the case, the government have not made provision for anybody in London, either the boroughs or the GLA, to fund us. So there's no provision made for that burden. And they've not made any provision for us to be able to raise money either. So we have the situation, which I think is, I would imagine it's relatively unprecedented, if not unprecedented, where you have a statutory body made by an Act of Parliament where the government has not provided for it to have funding. So our funding is made up of investments that we've made through our capital investments that we did in the early part of our establishment. It's made through funding provided by other public bodies like the UK, or funds like UK Share Prosperity, which funds our business support, or in the past the Mayor's Green New Deal has funded our business support, and bits of sponsorship and commercial work that we do. The problem for us ultimately is that we are a statutory body and we're trying to act in a way like an NGO, but we're not an NGO. You know, we have statutory objectives, and somebody needs to pay for us to be able to deliver those statutory objectives. Because
so would you say you have sufficient resources to support the increase in recycling rates, or indeed to carry out your statutory responsibilities in general?
I think we have somewhat sufficient resources for the next few years. I would say that we could do with more funding, and then we could provide one-to-one support to all London boroughs who needed it free of charge. At the moment, the boroughs have to pay for that if they want one-to-ones, but we can't do that. We don't have the funding to be able to do that. We don't have the staff and the resources. So we have to be careful what our overhead is, and therefore we're not able to engage more people to do that one-to-one work. We can do if boroughs pay for it. So in that response, to that extent, the amount of money that we can spend in year has to be constrained by our available finances, and our available finances are okay over the next 3 years, but beyond that there is a question.
I mean, we know that there are a number of waste authorities also, with statutory formulation, plus the South London Waste Partnership. Some of them working in those partnerships do have sources of incomes from, you can call them energy from waste plants, incinerators, whatever you like. You've obviously got the GLA local authorities through London councils and the waste authorities. Have you spoken to any of them about funding? I mean, have you asked Rachel whether Western Riverside Waste Authority might be willing to, give some money towards ReLondon and the overall picture?
We're having conversations, and I mean, waste authorities have made some funding available to us as part of some of our behaviour change campaigns. So, for example, we're working with the One World Living team. One World Living is the consumption-based emissions reduction part of London Council's 7 climate themes. And we work.
It's a snappy title.
One World Living's quite snappy.
I mean, we all, we're all obviously interested in this field, but even I got lost about halfway through that description.
Yes. So London Council have 7 climate themes, one of which is to reduce consumption-based emissions, which is about materials and not energy. And we work closely with that programme in relation to reduction of food waste, amongst other bits. And some of the waste authorities have funded us to do a London-wide food campaign called Eat Like a Londoner. So there is, I think, to your point, we have approached people to do tactical bits of work, which we have generally, as London said, we need to do this, and it would be more efficient for us to do this together. So we are there as a vehicle to do that. What we don't have is anybody underpinning our overhead. So that gives us, makes it difficult for us to plan with certainty more than 2 or 3 years in advance, which for an NGO is great, but for a public body is not so great, because you cannot have certainty over your programme delivery.
I'm not sure it's that great for NGOs either to have to, they have to employ a lot of people to go back all the time for those things. But I think that was very interesting what you were just saying. Does anyone want to add anything to what Wayne just said? Or shall I move on to the more detailed part of the discussion now? I'm going to hand over to Assembly Member Rogers, who I think is going to delve into. You want to come in on the more general points first, or when he asks his questions? Bring in Matthew and then bring in Phil.
Thank you. It's a good job we have 3 hours, because there's a lot that could be unpicked there throughout the whole of the first session. But in terms of what Wayne has just said, I mean, we work very closely with ReLondon on a range of issues, and you asked just now about engaging with planners, so it's an example which touches on that and the way that we engage with ReLondon. We're reviewing our planning guidance for new developments at the moment. We actually have quite an interesting collaboration with University of College London, with some of their students doing a research project which is sort of assisting with this, and a colleague from ReLondon is supporting with that project pro bono, free of charge, but that if we want to then engage them, ReLondon, to support us with, say, redrafting our guidance, for example, which would be really important in addressing the issue around new developments, there would be a charge with that. And then we, as a local authority, are in a position of saying, well, okay, do we commission them? Do we then need to go out to other consultancies to seek their input as well, their quotes and so on? So, from our perspective, is ReLondon a statutory body giving us useful advice and guidance in the nature of, like RAP, for example, or are they a private consultancy who charge for their work, and in which case do we also need to go out to other consultants to, so it makes our relationship with ReLondon not exactly complicated.
Unnecessarily complicated, though. That's perhaps what it's sounding like to me.
Yeah. And the irony is, of course, that RAP is a private body. It's not a public, it's not a statutory body, and receives significant amount of funding from government, which it does good work for. But as a statutory body, we receive no grant, which that is, I find that quite, given what you've just said, Matthew.
So it's an interesting arrangement. There are lots of other points that have been raised throughout the morning, but I could probably take up all 3 hours.
Well, it would have been interesting to have had Liz Goodwin here to comment on those matters as the current chair of ReLondon and someone who was rather closely associated with RAP for some years. Phil, you wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, just on the point of planning, we work with a lot of local authorities, 11 of them, but mainly on the commercial side. The street collection of the food waste. On a daily basis, we're turning down business because the boroughs are time-banding the streets for collections. So we've got to collect from the whole of London, and we mightn't get into their area, but they've got a collection time of an hour slot that they can collect the waste from. This reduces their ability to have recycling, not just food. And it's done, why it's done, I can't say, but it's done in a way that is punitive to businesses having a recycling service. Because of the density of London, it isn't possible for them always to have a container, a physical container that we will collect from in an area where we would go that's off street, so they will need to have a bagged service. And then the only way they can do that is in probably an hour to 2 hour time slot where they can leave a waste bag out, which is usually their only option then is a general waste collection, possibly from the council. So it actually puniates us from providing them and giving them a service. So it needs to be looked into the planning of when can they collect and what is the time that they can collect on the street.
Okay, so the timing of the collections. I'm assuming that that's probably to do with not wanting to have trucks on the street later on during the rush hour, and also for householders, keeping noise down because they don't want it too early, but then they don't want it to go off into, when there's going to be more vehicles around. I'm assuming that's...
Well, but this also happens in high urban density areas. So in around the West End and Westminster, in the City of London, where those issues aren't there. So there is time balance put there, and it is punitive to the commercial businesses coming in to collect their waste, and we aren't able to offer a service. So a lot of businesses don't have access to recycling levels that they'd want. So it's just easier for them to have only general waste.
Right. Jemilah, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, I just wondered if we were going to come back to the kind of comparison with other places in the UK, because I think I had some things to say on that, but also on the commercial data, commercial side and the wider municipal targets. I think kind of agree with that. I think in terms of what Wayne said around the legislation is going to improve that, but I think we are also, one of the things that's difficult there is the lack of data we have on actual commercial waste, and we know that that's been quite out of date in terms of the last time that was updated was 2009, and we would have hoped that that data would have been updated more recently than that, so that we would have a better understanding of commercial waste and what's happening with that and where we would have an opportunity to intervene. So we're actually, the GLA and ReLondon are working together on a project at the moment to see what we can do to look at the commercial waste within London and whether there's anything that we can do to improve our understanding of kind of data flows around commercial waste and improve where we could kind of intervene there. But I think we have also done, ReLondon's done some really good work there in terms of material flow analysis in specific sectors, so looking at fashion and food, and starting to look at packaging as well, so looking at where materials is flowing into London and out, and where there are opportunities there to intervene. But I think, hopefully the kind of the legislation will improve that and also improve the data so that we can have better understanding of what commercial waste is actually happening, where we can intervene better.
I am now going to move on to Assembly Member Rogers, who's going to pick up the questioning, and I think might be talking about flats.
Indeed. Thank you, Chair. First question is for Wayne. We've been speaking about flats, and ReLondon's done some work on this and has put together the flats recycling package. So what impact are you hoping that has had on addressing recycling rates in flats and HMOs?
Well, I mean, I hope that it will be significant, obviously. Flatted properties, and in this context, I'm really talking about estates, so, congregations of flatted properties where you have communal recycling. And of course, flatted properties means lots of different things. There's lots of examples of mansion blocks, there's flats above shops, there's estates, but we did work in estates. The first piece of work we did, the so-called Flats Recycling Package 1, worked with Peabody Housing Association and 6 London boroughs, so Islington, Hackney, Tower Hamlets, Lambeth, Westminster and Camden. And we did detailed inventories of 132 estates. And they're all different, of course, and this is part of the problem. So we tried to come up with some key principles and guidelines that local authorities could follow, which I'll talk about in a second. But overarching all of that was this thing I mentioned at the start, which is common sense. It's fairly obvious, I think, but we were able to demonstrate that citizens will engage with recycling if they have the knowledge, motivation, and it's easy to do so. And if any of those factors are asymmetrical, then you have a problem. But if they're all in alignment, then you can get increased recycling. But that's not easy. It does cost. Hopefully those costs are saved by your reduction in waste and contamination costs. So it's worth investing in. And then we did the first piece of work showed an increase in recycling, about 25% increase, not percentage points, % increase in recycling, and a reduction in contamination, about 30% reduction in contamination, I believe. Our second piece of work looked at filling the collection where waste wasn't collected, in particular food waste, and we put food and I think electricals into the second scheme, and we did that mostly in Lambeth with a project funded by EcoSurety, and that project identified 150% increase in recycling to near curbside levels. I think those estates showed something like 27% recycling. So the outcome of that is if you have goods well located, well signed, collected frequently, recycling and waste facilities co-located with food waste at the same point, you can get communal recycling rates that are getting close to curbside rates, and that I think London-wide would transform the way that our recycling rate. And it's worth noting that London's dry recycling rate is pretty good compared to other regions. I think it's 22%, and I think the highest is 26 or 27%. So we're in the ballpark of good. Where there is an issue is that green and food waste collection, which you would expect from a city compared to the rural counties. You would expect us to have difficulty collecting that much waste, and I think that's right. So having well located, well signed, motivated citizens using food waste and dry recycling and communal sites is what we've shown, and we've shown how to do it. And you can look at the Flats Recycling Package 2, which has design principles and guidelines, operational guidelines and communication guidelines to enable local authorities to implement those schemes.
Thank you. And to come to Matthew, I think Islington was part of the initial 2-year project for the Flats Recycling Package. What was your experience of that, and what's your experience been like using the package itself, and what impact has it had?
I mean, the experience of being part of the trial was, we were very happy to be part of it, to be offered the opportunity to be part of it. We've been, we have a very high proportion of purpose-built blocks of flats in Islington, council estates, social housing estates, mansion blocks. All of these have similar challenges. So it was great to be part of the pilot, and it was, to be fair, it was very good working with ReLondon on that pilot. So that was fine. I think in terms of the package itself, it's been, what it's helped us to do is to galvanise Islington's action on improving estate recycling. So when we wrote our reduction and recycling plan, which we haven't sort of mentioned, but obviously all London boroughs are required to produce a reduction and recycling plan to set out what they're doing to achieve the mayor's targets and improve recycling and so on. A key, a big element of that was action on estate recycling. And in drafting that report, I was able to reference the Flats Recycling Package as a kind of an authoritative kind of approach, sort of standard that we could aim towards. And to be honest, it's not rocket science. It comes down to having good quality facilities, enough capacity, put them in the right place, look after them well, keep them clean, and tell people about them. It's fairly straightforward, but it helps you to when you have it in an approved document, you have a policy, you can wave it in front of your housing colleagues and say, the council has agreed this. You can wave it in front of your finance colleagues and, seek funding. And we're incredibly fortunate in Islington that we do have a 3-year investment programme into improving recycling on estates, which for us also includes new bin enclosures. I'm a great believer that bins shouldn't just be kind of scattered around estates willy-nilly. They should be, housed properly, looking nice, and not, I was going to say attractive, not unattractive for residents to come and use. Wayne has talked about the principles of behaviour change, about them, recycling being easy and motivation and the opportunity and so on. And I think the Flats Recycling Package is a useful tool for enabling that within a local authority.
Thank you. And Wayne, how many? Obviously, you had the boroughs you initially worked with during the project. How many other local authorities in London are now using this package, or at least the principles therein?
I mean, I imagine all of them are to a greater or lesser extent, but I'm not entirely sure that there's been the transformation that we need to see at this point in time, and part of that is because of the blockages that we've mentioned. So, now that we have this simpler recycling, there is an opportunity, I think, for all local authorities in London to look at the Flats Recycling Package, and when they come to implementing their schemes under simpler recycling, to use that as a route map going forward. So there's a great opportunity. And I would also say, actually, that we've been talking to colleagues nationally, and we've been approached by other cities in England who have seen the work that we've done, who would like us to come and talk to them about implementing this package too. So going back to our point on funding, that's quite interesting to us if we can do that at a sort of reasonable rate, and then use that to help invest in additional resources for London. Well, I mean, you're shaking your head, but you know, it
just seems a bit mad to charge Birmingham money to help them improve their flats recycling, so that you can then recycle that money into helping other London boroughs. I mean,
well, ideally, we'd be paid for by the government to help London and Birmingham do that, in my view. So, you know, that I think is, yes, I totally agree with you, Leonie, that we shouldn't have to do this. But I think there's an opportunity for other cities to learn from London's good practice, because we are the experts, you know, within London on how to manage very dense urban recycling. So, and we have a really good piece of work that's evidence-based, and shows you, as Matthew said, you can wave this in front of colleagues, and it has the evidence, and it shows you a way to go forward in order to implement good quality recycling schemes for your residents. And that's true not just of London, but every city, I think, is the point I'm making.
Thank you. Jemilah.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to agree with that, and also say that I think, in terms of national legislation as well, bringing in those requirements, and that's from like all properties for food and those mixed dry recyclables, and we know that that's going to be an issue, and we have been lobbying government really to make sure that the way they implement those strategies actually take into account the fact that so many of our properties in London are flatted, and that needs to be done properly. So that's partly on the communications, but also I think making sure that boroughs can actually implement those services. I think we've got 2 boroughs who've committed to implementing the flats recycling package in the next RRP period, and a number who have committed to reviewing that with the hopefully with the aim of doing that. And we will keep following up on that, because we think that's a really important piece of work that we need to do in London to make sure that we are doing that, recognising that there are more and more flats that are being built. So I think, just to make sure that it's actually happening and that we're following up on that.
Thank you. Move on to my next question. The first question was quite specific. The second one is far more broad. And I think probably go to Ray to start off with this. So, I mean, Wayne just said that lots of other parts of the country can learn from London, but I'm sure there's other things that we can learn from other parts of the country. So I wonder if there's any lessons from other authorities, Wales, Manchester, for example, in terms of how you increase recycling rates.
Wales is the obvious place to go to, I would guess, to learn about how to do it. I mean, I think the recycling figures are up around the 60-65% sort of mark for most of them. They do have high-rise accommodations in the areas of such as Cardiff and Swansea, so they've got those kind of challenges there, but probably not on the same scale as you've got in London. They've implemented a system by which local residents recycle their materials in a fixed kind of way, but they also have a process of statutory targets as well on their local authorities. So it's a combined approach, a consistent collection system which is some way ahead of the English system, but also it's accompanied by a target system with teeth, if you like, for want of a better phrase. And that's, I guess, a lesson we can be learning. Manchester, again, they've had their issues in the past. The earlier parts of their contract, which I think they got out of some years ago, things weren't going quite so well, but they're going a lot better now. As I alluded to earlier, Liverpool are not doing quite so well, but they're not such a big city as this one. But I think, as Leonie said, other areas around the world are doing quite well. Milan, and particularly places in Italy, have got different challenges to London, but they've got a lot of smaller, above flats kind of shops, like Wayne's going to do some research on as well. But they're doing reasonably well, particularly around the food waste collection aspects. We did, the institution did a food waste local authority webinar some years ago now, where we had a speaker from Wales, from Bieber, I think it was, David Newman, who was experienced in rolling out those kind of systems in Milan and other places in Italy. And the success rate over there has been quite phenomenal. But that's a case of, again, communication, as Wayne was saying, communication was key, providing the infrastructure, not just the treatment, and the collection infrastructure as well. So it's quite important to get all of the ducks aligned, I think, with these kind of things.
I think there's an element of compulsion in Milan as well. Not, I think it's, people are expected to do so. So there is an element of that in Milan, which we don't have here. They do really well on food, and I think that's in the Lombardy region. I think they do pretty well on food. But there's a different context and a different kind of governance issue around that.
That's interesting. Thank you. Does anyone else on the panel want to come in? Yes, Jemilah.
Yeah, I think taking the comparisons with elsewhere, I think Wales is one that comes up a lot, but I think that then it brings us back to kind of some of the challenges in London, and we have been in contact with Wales and looking to meet with them and learn more from them. But I think, and we have comparisons with other places as well, but it does then just bring back, I think, if you actually look at the kind of strategy that Wales has, it's not hugely dissimilar to the kind of actions and things that we're looking to implement in London. It is that the powers and the kind of investment in infrastructure that makes the difference. But I think also then you come back to the kind of, even if we do put in very similar things, there's still challenges in London that are going to be very different to Wales in terms of, like, the population density in Wales is 150 people per square kilometre compared to 5,500 in London. The amount of green waste that they produce is very high compared to London. We're never going to have that level of green waste, which makes up a huge part of recycling rates, because it's heavy waste that goes in there. And then we've got the elements of kind of London has so many factors of, that we already know from research really hinder kind of recycling around deprivation and home ownership and other issues that they're kind of unchangeable in London. Well, not unchangeable, but they're going to be things that are really challenging to change, even if we put in place the right factors. That's not to say that we can't learn from other places, and I think we really will. We've been doing a lot of work with Milan on food waste and things like that, and trying to learn from other places to implement that. But I think it does still, it's quite hard to compare London to other areas in the UK and in other regions, because we're just not quite on the same scale.
Thank you very much. Chair, back to you.
I'm going to bring in Assemblymember Best, who has indicated, and then I'm going to bring in Assemblymember Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. Wayne, just wanted to come back to you really on the flats recycling packaging study research you did. What kinds of things did you find around in terms of heights or estate setup? I mean, is there something where these problems are worse or better? I'm thinking, obviously, height is self-explanatory, but I mean in terms of setup, if, say, something's in a row along a busy street or in kind of like a self-contained square with courtyard, that kind of thing, is there a difference in where you see changes?
Well, I think what we discovered was that, in general, so I'm making sweeping generalisations here, but you can read the flats package and see this kind of this theme, that you can get to a position where the waste and recycling are located for operational reasons, not for ease reasons. So maybe they're around the back where people don't go. Maybe the waste bin is somewhere else and the recycling is in a different location, so people have to make 2 trips. Maybe the recycling isn't placed on your way out of the facility of the estate. Maybe it's placed in a bunker somewhere that's not been looked at for years and is dirty and dark. These are we've got some kind of pictures of this kind of stuff happening in the flats recycling package 1. So there are all sorts of issues. They're all different, and they tend to be placed in order to make it easy for the operational crew, which is understandable, to empty the bins, not necessarily for the residents to access them. And so that's one of the issues. So we recommended a kind of typography, a consistent typography, buying new bins, improving the lighting, emptying the bins, making sure that residents understand that they're valued and that their contribution is recognised. So all of these things count and make a difference.
Just to come back to the question then, was there any kind of evidence around where that happens more? So do you see more issues arising in high-rise, or is there no more issues? Do you see more issues arising in more, let's say isolated,
Yeah.
but more independent square.
I'm not sure I have the answer to that. I feel that the most of the stuff that we looked at, most of the residences that we looked at were medium height, medium density, as opposed to high rise. But I'll come back to you on that issue because that might be different in Tower Hamlets. So I haven't got that information. I can find out.
He wants to say.
I think that one of the things we're struggling with is that the estate's infrastructure we're mostly dealing with was built at a time when waste was entirely different, and when the way that we're expected to manage that waste was entirely different. So there's a legacy there of blocks of flats being built to accommodate a single waste stream, rubbish, which itself at the time comprised of very different types of material. And if you go back long enough, of course, that waste was, ash and dust and so on. So we've got lots of, particularly the high-rise buildings that have got still got refuse chutes, which are, probably narrower than a pizza box, certainly narrower than most boxes that an Amazon parcel comes in. You've got bin stores which are built to accommodate rubbish bins. And, even if they could accommodate enough rubbish, recycling and food waste bins, they're probably not designed in a way where you can actually access the 3 different streams. And then, so what we're having to do is retrofit recycling and food waste and potentially electrical and textiles and so on, separate streams. Let's not get into 7 bins, that's done, but at least those different streams.
Yeah, but I've already bought mine, so.
Yeah, send them to Rishi. We're trying to retrofit these different streams onto blocks of flats and estates which were not built to accommodate them. So, as I say, bin stores that aren't fit for purpose now, and then trying to find space within the grounds of estates for those additional facilities. Ideally, they are co-located with the rubbish bins, but they're often stuck in the bin chamber underneath the refuse chute. So it's trying to manage the legacy of how these estates have been built at a different time to sort of accommodate modern waste.
So it's an age thing. So it's not to do with any of the new buildings, say, being built. New buildings would create less challenges. It's kind of
so long as they're planned and built in the right way. We have examples in Islington of blocks of flats built within the last 30 years which have no provision for waste storage, let alone recycling storage. That obviously,
cannot
I
agree.
Again.
I'm asking the question because I know there's really bad. We've got loads of new flats that are terribly managed and produce some of the worst. So that's why I'm kind of getting to the crux. It seems there's not really any definitive there's different problems for different
that's a planning issue, and I think most boroughs in London now are, we have a robust local plans with requirements for, waste and recycling accommodation within new builds. We've got circular economy requirements for major developments and so on. So I think my hope, and certainly in Islington, is that this doesn't happen going forward. And so most of the issues we're having to deal with, and of course the larger estates are the older estates which have those inbuilt issues.
Thanks. And Wayne, I just wanted to check with you. Have you, from ReLondon, been able to use TfL advertising at all?
Yes.
And what have you done with that?
We use, I believe we use TfL advertising for, it's not free of charge, obviously.
Oh, so you don't get free?
No, and we use it for, our tactical campaigns as well as our sort of more general behaviour change campaigns. So we have a Be That Londoner under the tag London Recycles, which we do various phases using TfL, and our current campaign, as I mentioned before, is Eat Like a Londoner, which is around promoting healthy, sustainable eating.
So would it be helpful to get free of charge?
It would be very helpful.
Okay, that's about it, yeah. No, and apart from that, I welcome the work you're doing to get Birmingham to pay you to do some work. Taxpayers are taxpayers, so either way, Birmingham taxpayers will pay for you. whether it's the government or through Birmingham. So I welcome that work.
I don't think I ever mentioned Birmingham, but other cities, I think I would say.
Many other cities are available. It's just that their recycling record is not particularly good. But I'm just going to move on from Assemblymember Best to briefly to Assemblymember McCartney. No, I think we just need to move on because we need to get to Assemblymember Bakari. We're getting slightly bogged down here. Did you want to come in on this particular matter?
Yeah, just on that, and I was interested what Matthew said about local plans. So I'm just wondering, when they are rewritten, is there any, I suppose, obligation for them to use your best practice in those local plans?
I think
or is that something that we should be recommending? That's what I'm wondering.
Well, definitely some local authorities have mentioned it in their RRPs.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's no obligation to include. But of course, one would expect that to be the best practice. So if you were incorporating that into a plan, it would be ideal to do that, and then you would have something for developers to base their designs on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Assemblymember Bakari now.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to also mention, when I became a councillor in Merton, I had 30 emails a day about bins. So this is such a big topic for us in terms of local councils, but also the amount of emotion it creates within our residents when we're not doing it right and it's not working. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the interventions that have been happening and the impact that it has created. Now, when I was looking at the map, and Ray, you mentioned Ealing, you're right. The recycling rates in the London Borough, it's like there's some dividing lines here, and I thought, Ray, maybe you could help me out with this. So there's a bit of a north-south divide. There's definitely an outer and inner divide.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about the density of London, we've talked about flats, but also, I mean, interestingly, there could be a possibility that councils have an impact as well. Now, I am going to notice that the fact that the Sutton, Kingston, and Richmond are Lib Dem councils and are also within the high rate end. You know, doing very, very well.
And it's got a more green waste over that kind of part of the country.
You know, serious question though. Yeah. You know, are interventions within those councils actually making a difference, despite all those factors of the fact that they could be in high density or low density areas?
I think it can have an effect. Political will is obviously more focused in that kind of area than in some other local authorities. The other thing I found when I was looking through the figures as well was that unitary authorities seem to be doing better than just the collection authorities as well. So unifying the collection and the treatment infrastructure kind of helps in some way to make a difference. It's not uniformly different, but it's sort of there's a little bit of a suggestion there. I mean, I might have had more experience than that than me, but yeah, there is an enormous range of performance in London. The latest figures I found from something I found on the internet yesterday, you go from say around 20% up to about 48. So it's possible to do better, but as you say, the ones that are more rural in nature, I guess, where you've got more garden waste, or you've got more or less high-rise accommodation, so you've got more green waste generation. They're the ones that are going to do the best, I guess, from a weight-based target, such as a percentage, such as we're measuring here. There is perhaps something to be said about measuring waste performance in a different way, a carbon target maybe. And not solely basing on a waste target. Whether London would do better on that, I don't know. But the metrics there can be explored. But yeah, it's a mixed picture. It's the best I can say really on that. And yeah,
I'm happy to bring in Jemilah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think where actions have been taken, we can see there are improvements. But I think that's part of the complexity of London, that we have so many boroughs, and kind of the only highlighted earlier, like the number of different contracts and things like that maybe prevent or interact with when boroughs take action and pick those up. So I think we have obviously through the RRP process, which we've just come to, we're just kind of finalising them for the 2023 to 2025, kind of identified, and we're going through a process at the moment in part of a piece of work with ReLondon to really look at that best practice. And I think what we would kind of like to do is understand some of what you understand where there are boroughs who have similar kind of makeups or property types and things like that, and where we can look at that best practice and share that better. So I think that's one of the lessons that we're learning from the RRP process. So trying to do as much as we can maybe to get ahead of that next time when we go around, to make sure that we can provide more information about what, for individual boroughs. And I think maybe it goes back to what Wayne was talking about with funding and that one-to-one support from ReLondon. But if you can, the more that we could do, I think, to be able to provide a better understanding of what individual boroughs within their individual circumstances could do and what best practice looks like for them, then we can help and actually support that. But I think, because I've read every single one of the RRPs as part of the process, and it is interesting when you see those different trends within different boroughs with different things, and some of them are doing well and some of them aren't, or doing less well, and really what's underlying that. And I know that's very complex and it's lots of challenges, but the more I think that we can do to try and understand that and get ahead would be better.
Rachel, can I bring you in at this point? Because, you could tell me a little bit about how boroughs are organised, and obviously from your perspective, but about 8 boroughs organise their own waste and are not part of a waste partnership. Can you give me a reason why that might be the case, and what the pros, benefits, definitely, or not too many? What are the pros and cons?
Sure, I'll give it a go. So in London, obviously, we have a rather unique situation where we have 4 statutory joint waste disposal authorities that are groupings of boroughs, and then we have a set of unitary authorities. And that comes around from when the GLC was disbanded. Prior to that, the GLC organised the waste disposal for the whole of London, and at the time that it was abolished, boroughs could decide whether they were going to do their own arrangements or group together. So that's a little bit of the history of how we are where we are. And obviously I work for one of the statutory joint waste disposal authorities, and we have to work closely with our collection authorities to ensure that our treatment matches and streamlines the way that they are collecting the waste, so that together we can achieve the targets that we collectively decide to do. So in terms of how we work together, it's possible to work together as well as a unitary can. It comes down to good communication, good collaboration, making sure you have a strategy in place that everybody's signed up to and working towards.
Jemilah, what do you think in terms of the Mayor's position on this? Is he encouraging boroughs to work together in this way with partnerships? And what do you think that's something that he'd be encouraging?
So I think we're kind of working within the things that we've got. But I think we do encourage boroughs to work together and to learn together and to make sure that we can do that to provide services that are more consistent and efficient and effective for residents. So, yes.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of the GLA Act, do you think that it does need to be amended so that the Mayor and the GLA could have more powers to deal with waste, like have a London-wide waste partnership, maybe bigger? Would that be beneficial?
So I think that has been looked at before, and it wasn't taken forward, and I think that's why we had ReLondon to help bring that together and share that best practice and learning, and make sure that we can actually work in a more collaborative and more consistent way across London. I think in terms of powers, I think the Mayor has powers, and I think we try to use those to our best advantage. At the moment, we're trying to work within the space that we have. I think we've been really clear that others need to be involved and doing their bit to deliver the Mayor's strategy and those targets. And I think that is probably a way that we can work if we have the kind of policy and legislation in place that supports our process, and boroughs are willing and funded and able to implement those changes. And I think that's how we would like to work, and that's what we're focused on at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Now, shall I move on to the next area?
Well, I was just thinking, because we've reached 11:15, that now might be a very good time to take a break, because I'm hoping that this might be about halfway through the meeting, and we won't quite fill up the whole of the 3 hours. So it's 11:15. We'll come back at 11:25. Sorry about the gavel. Now with added microphone. We're going to come back to Assembly Member Bakari, who we just paused in the middle of her questioning.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to wrap up the last section that I was on, and I want to go to Wayne next. We've been talking about how to communicate with certain groups, and I'm quite interested in young Londoners. Could you give me some information on that particular group, you know, when it comes to recycling, and is there a different approach when it comes to young Londoners?
Good question. This is going to sound a little bit controversial, and I don't mean to be, but Ray's laughing. Young Londoners are difficult to engage and do not recycle, our evidence says, as much as the average Londoner, which you would think is not the case. You would think that young Londoners would be more engaged because of the issues around climate, etc. So I don't know why that is, but we do have a very well-developed and nuanced approach to engaging young Londoners, and we have a variety of campaigns to do that. For example, we run a campaign called Love Not Landfill, which is around fashion and textiles, and we engage young Londoners in that, and we use various social media techniques to target specific audiences and specific demographics, and we can even target very specific postcode areas with our Facebook, etc. Actually, Facebook makes me sound like a very old person, doesn't it? I'm sure that's not what I meant.
Yeah, they don't do Facebook anymore.
We send them letters
just for people who are 40 plus.
I know.
So I hear.
Just realised I've completely undermined my authority in this stuff, haven't I? But yes, so I mean, my communications behavioural team are obviously the experts, and so we use various techniques and various campaigns to specifically target that age group. But it's one of the demographics in London who recycle below average, and London over-indexes for young people, and it's one of the many factors that makes London a challenging place to get recycling rates high.
I mean, Jemilah, you mentioned, that we do need to do more on communications, and I think one of the things I've noticed as a councillor, it's where younger people might be living, and the conditions that they're living in, and the way they're living, and the fact that they're having to constantly move all the time, and there's no real longevity in where they're staying. One of the noticeable things, particularly in my ward, that I've noticed is that flats above shops seem to be impacted more for some reason. I'd like to get, I can see Wayne nodding here as well, but Jemilah, if you can come in as well in terms of those particular issues, and if Wayne wants to come back in.
Yeah, well, I think, going back to some of those challenges, we know that kind of transients in London has a really high rate of people who move very frequently, and that can be a challenge, and as you said, like flats above shops where people aren't necessarily living as long, or maybe they have real challenges. And I think we have challenges with people who are kind of owners of those flats and managing agents and things, and like making sure that those communications can actually get through to them. I think there can be things where people are in like shared or communal places where they're not, it's harder to target them actually to make sure that communication is getting to them. So that's a challenge, and I think ReLondon and Wayne might want to come, and I've done quite a lot of thinking around kind of insight into those, and going into kind of flats above shops and things like that, and understanding what messaging and how they might help, and what those specific barriers are that will help with that work as well. We have been doing some work specifically around the food, which is targeting kind of different demographics and as well, and different sectors. So we've just done a piece of research that will be published shortly, looking at how we can improve our progress towards our food target. And part of that is looking at different, like where food waste is coming from different sectors. So that includes kind of hospitality, also student housing and things like that, where there can be different challenges around food waste, and understanding what activities can be done there. And we know that communication is really high on that list in terms of things that you need to do to get people to recycle more. But we have had also, and ReLondon have done campaigns, as Wayne said, specifically targeted at things around also kind of food. So there was a program called Food Wave, which worked with young people to make, it was more about kind of understanding kind of food and food waste, but also kind of recipes and things like that to actually kind of target those groups. And obviously it's quite challenging to do that, so that focused on a small number of Londoners, but I think there are things like that that you can do to actually kind of engage younger Londoners in these things, and it's not always necessarily around messaging around recycling. It could be other things as well.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to come in, particularly on the shop bit?
Yeah, on the flats above shops, I think I said 10%. It's about 4%. So it's about 4% of residences in London are flats above shops. We think they're probably the hardest type of property to target for, lack of space. Very difficult to communicate with, shared doorways, high transient. There are lots of issues, lack of knowledge and confusion about how, when and where to recycle. So all of those things about knowledge, ease and motivation are really difficult to crack with flats above shops. So we're working on a project with Waltham Forest, Hammersmith and Fulham and Islington on a flats above shops addition to our flats recycling package. And it's going to be challenging, but what we have found is that people do want to recycle. And that's the interesting thing. So if we can somehow figure out how to provide the service for people to use, this is the beautiful thing. People do want to participate. They do want to recycle. So you've just got to kind of, provide them with the opportunity to do so. And they generally will do it.
I'm just picking up on that point.
Yeah.
We have been running a pilot food waste collection service for flats above shops in a small area in Islington. About 10% of our properties in Islington are flats above shops. So we have a small pilot where we have communal bins for food waste along Holloway Road, and we provided kitchen caddies to the residents, and we knocked on the doors, and we were only able to access a relatively small proportion of those doors, but of the people that we spoke to and told them about the service and offered them a kitchen waste caddy, nobody pushed back. Nobody pushed back and refused and said, I'm not having one of those, they smell. Nobody declined the kitchen caddy. Now, I'm not pretending that participation is through the roof or that everybody is using the service, but in terms of people being receptive to having services that are convenient and well designed and so on, people are open to this. So that was a really positive experience.
I think the issue is making sure that you can continually update the education and knowledge that you need to give to those people, because you're going to find those people have gone in 3 months.
Absolutely. And it's a real, the pilot it's for 260 odd properties along one stretch of Holloway Road, and within the properties that we saw, there were very nice apartments in mansion blocks. There were single rooms in houses converted into flats, converted into individual rooms, seemingly converted into shoeboxes, housing people who may have just arrived in the country the week before. Who knows? They probably didn't speak
language
English.
Issue again.
Real mixture of circumstances. Nobody declined a food waste bin.
No. Jemilah.
Yeah, and I think that's a point we've been making when we've been talking about the legislation and making sure that there's kind of funding that's built into that, and recognising for London that's an additional challenge that it will be to elsewhere in the country, that you do need to have that continual. If you have people who are, you have to spend more time on those communications to actually get through and make them effective. So I think we've been trying to make the point, because obviously having a service is one thing, and it's really good to know that the national legislation is going to support that, and that we will have services rolled out more widely. But I think obviously we want to see recycling rates increase, and we want to make sure that we're having those benefits from that for residents and for the environment. So it's really important that you have the things on top of that to make sure that they are actually used. So I think as Matthew said, having the food service, but we still know that a lot of food is still going in the wrong bin. A large chunk of it is still going in the residual waste, and has huge kind of greenhouse gas implications and stuff on top of that. So it's really important that we do have that continual messaging, and that needs to come from somewhere. So I think we're trying to make sure that in how that's kind of funded through national legislation takes into account that we do need that, and we need that at high levels in London.
If you can be quick.
In terms of how do we get people to use those services, obviously ongoing messaging is really important, but a real barrier for us as local authorities is about enforcement. And I don't know whether, as a committee, you're planning to come on to this, in which case I'll wait. But we used to be able to politely and reasonably and firmly say to people, here's your recycling service, you are required to use this service. And if you do not use this service persistently and willingly without good reason, you know, we are able to take reasonable enforcement measures against you. Just as we can, you know, there is legislation relating to businesses. There's producer responsibility, putting requirements on producers of goods and packaging, requiring them to do that. There is no requirement in law for householders to recycle. They do not have to recycle, and we cannot require them to recycle. That ability in that law
You're
was there.
proposing a change of law here, are you?
Well, it was, I mean, it is in there. It's in the Environmental Protection Act, Section 46, which enabled us to take reasonable enforcement measures. That was changed under the, I can't remember the specific bit of legislation, under the Localism Act, yes, one of those acts, which effectively means that we cannot take enforcement action where people are willingly not using the very good and reliable and convenient recycling services that we provide them. And that's a barrier for us.
I'm happy to move on to the next area. I can see some people really want to get involved with the conversation, Chair.
I think we do need to move on because we're less than halfway through the questions that we're planning to ask, and we are now more than halfway through the amount of time that we have available. So I would like it if you could move on to the next section. Thanks very much.
So we're moving on to reduction and recycling plans, and I'd like to bring in Jemilah and Wayne into this, if possible. What did you learn from the first reduction and recycling plans, and how did that inform your second phase of RRPs? I'm happy to go with Jemilah first and then Wayne.
Yeah, so I think there were a few things that we learned. I think originally the RRPs were supposed to be 4 years long, and I think that was a period that was too long, and so this round we've done them for 2 years, which is also kind of linked to making sure that they're kind of, because we knew there were going to be changes in legislation and stuff, and to make sure that we had the opportunity to bring them in, so we have shortened that. We've also kind of understood that from the first round that there was probably a lot of inconsistency between the approaches that boroughs had taken and the way that they had developed their plans, and we needed to bring that more consistent. So we've reviewed the process to make it more consistent and give more guidance and more opportunity for boroughs to discuss ahead of time to understand the process and bring that in. We've simplified the approach to just the formatting. We were using kind of an Excel process, and we've moved to a simpler Word document to make sure that we can have more consistency and it's easier for boroughs to actually fill in. We've also taken into account things around the EPS, which escapes me what it stands for at the moment.
Emissions Performance
Standard, yes, around. So looking at the kind of emissions related with that, and we know that boroughs had some challenges in how that was done. So we've been working really closely with our contractor to make sure that there's training and advice available in order for them to put that forward. And we've just been working much more closely with ReLondon to support that process, to make sure that we can try and do it more quicker and give better feedback to boroughs as we go through and negotiate those. Also just checking my notes. Just adding more opportunity for boroughs to talk about what they might be doing next, and we knew there was kind of needed flexibility around, especially around the legislation, so working out how we can do provide wording around that. And we also standardised the targets and how we put targets in there. I know that was one of the things that the committee had raised before, and it's important to kind of have consistency and comparability between the boroughs, so we gave more guidance on how they should be setting their targets and made those more standardised around the amount of waste that's arising and recycling rates and how those are going forward. As I said earlier, we're looking to go and do a kind of a similar approach this time to learn lessons from what we've done. So we've been doing some internal work to understand kind of how we run that process internally and try and learn lessons between us and ReLondon about how we could do that better. And I think we also want to find out from boroughs how we can make this easier, because ultimately I think it's a process that we want to be helpful and useful and actually drive the actions and towards the targets that the Mayor wants to deliver.
And do you want to add in?
I mean, I would just add that, what Jemilah said, we at ReLondon helped to facilitate and support boroughs and the GLA during the process. So we ran webinars and drop-in surgeries, which were quite useful for local authority officers to just to join us online at any point in time if they have technical issues. And we continue now to support ongoing delivery of an implementation of the RRPs through webinars, etc. So the support is there. It's a lot of work, but I think the ultimate outcome is very valuable, and certainly I think probably the first time that we've had this comprehensive, or more or less comprehensive, view of London's recycling actions going forward.
Islington's, been involved with this as well. And Matthew, could you give us your insight and the experience of putting this together? And was the process clear?
Yes, I would say it was clear, particularly second time round. I think we had very clear guidance. I think the guidelines, the templates and so on were simplified. We were working towards the same London Environment Strategy goals as we were the first time round, which obviously meant we were more familiar with them, and we had already evolved our thinking about how we were sort of looking to achieve those targets. So, and the support from the GLA and from ReLondon was great. I think could I comment on there are 4 key objectives that you're required to sort of work towards in the RRP, which are fundamentally about increasing recycling, reducing waste, reducing emissions standards, and working to ensure that London is managing its own waste, which is more of a regional issue. In terms of the first 2 objectives, I think there is a sort of a relentless drive, it seems, towards achieving recycling rates, recycling targets, which is fine, it's important, but the second of those objectives is about reducing overall waste arisings with a particular focus on single-use plastics and food waste. And I think we have to recognise that those 2 objectives aren't necessarily compatible in all ways. In order to achieve our net zero carbon targets, which is, if you like, the higher objective to all of this, we want to reduce waste. It's far more carbon efficient to eliminate waste than to recycle any of it. Recycling in some ways is the least effective thing if you want to reduce carbon emissions. So I think when we're relentlessly trying to sort of encourage more people to recycle their food waste, but at the same time trying to get them to reduce food waste, we're trying to encourage more people to recycle plastic, but at the same time avoid using plastic. It can be tricky in terms of the messaging, and if you're successful at the second objective, reducing waste, it potentially can have a detrimental impact on your ability to achieve the first objective, which is increasing recycling. And I think Ray mentioned earlier on, should we be looking at alternative ways of measuring our performance around this, rather than recycling rates, whether it's carbon-based or weight-based, or just looking at residual waste. I think that's a really important point to be considering, rather than having the relentless focus on recycling targets.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up now, and I just picked up on a lot of things that you've said about best practice being shared, and if I know that Phil, you were desperate to come in earlier as well, but Phil and Ray, I'm going to ask you just very last question. In 2016, the Mayor created a post called the Walking and Cycling Commission, and he was, increasing rates of cycling in London. Would the creation of something similar for Waste and Recycling Commissioner help improve, in your opinion, maybe recycling rates, but also carbon efficiency in other areas, like Matthew was talking about? Do you think that might be something that might bring everything together that we need to get that one voice coming across about across London?
Yeah, it could have an effect, I guess. As a keen cyclist myself, mine is as well. We've found that the network in London, certainly from a cycling point of view, has improved immensely since that particular time. So why couldn't it work, I guess, is probably the question which we should throw back at you. You know, make it happen, make it so. Can I just come back to a point that Michael was raising about residual waste, and there's a statistic here which is rather encouraging from a London point of view. 20 of the 20 English local authorities with the lowest kilogram of household waste collected per person, half are London boroughs. So, from an actual waste collection point of view, we're collecting less waste, which is an achievement in itself, I guess. We may not be recycling as much as we need to, but we're not producing as much as other areas in the country. So that's a good news story, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Phil, do you want to?
I think the idea of a recycling czar isn't a bad one. It would give us a central point of contact, and we get in there. Because sometimes dealing with, so to give you a bit about ours, we deal with the West London Waste Authority. We collect all the food on their behalf and process it. It's all done within the M25 in London. We do South West London Waste Authority as well. We've got a part of that contract where that's delivered into us. And yeah, if we could have a central point and consistent messaging across the boroughs of this is where it is, because not all the partnerships, it's a question for Rachel Morley, do they agree that AD is the appropriate way to collect food and to process food, and then are they going to allow that because they're in contracts to go to those areas, or are we going to stay within those contracts? That's the key point.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair, are you okay with it? Yeah. Have to get permission.
No, that's all right.
Can we pick up the pace, though? We really do need
sure.
to do that.
I think it's an interesting idea, but I think we have ReLondon, and ReLondon's role is to coordinate recycling and waste activity within the boroughs across London. I think we've picked up some of the issues around that and how it's increasingly having to develop funding and charge for its services, and I think while a sort of a waste and recycling, waste reduction czar is an interesting idea, you almost risk sort of ditching one good organisation and replacing it with another one. Let's make the most of the organisational and the structure that is there, but make it work properly and make it independent and genuinely a service for all London boroughs across London.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Right, we're now going to move on to Assembly Member Polanski, who's going to pick up the questioning, and we are all going to start picking up the pace.
We'll absolutely pick up the pace. It's interesting to hear lots of talk about Wales. Just in the last couple of weeks, I visited Swansea, Neath, Cardiff, and spoken to Senedd members there, and they talk a lot about political will and culture. One thing, and I'm picking up, Matthew, what you were just talking about, the potential incompatibility between recycling rates, those increasing, and reducing waste. Jemilah, is it time for a zero waste city, in essence, as the Mayor to say, let's have a waste reduction target?
I think the London Environment Strategy just set out a commitment to make London zero waste, and so I think within the London Environment Strategy we have kind of sections on waste. We also have sections on circular economy, and they're both kind of important elements of how the Mayor is working to kind of manage the kind of waste or reduce the waste that London produces. I think they are both really important, and we spend a lot of time on doing both of them. So I think reducing the amount of waste that we produce is really important, and that is something that is built into the RRPs, where we're trying to get, we're setting targets around getting boroughs to reduce that waste. Whether or not we set a kind of higher level target, I think at the moment we're delivering the London Environment Strategy and the targets in there, but we know that as part of that, reducing the waste and bringing in circular approaches is really critical. So a lot of what we do with ReLondon and circularity is core to the business plan that ReLondon have, and I think it really underpins a lot of the work that we do. So we have, in terms of our recycling targets around food and plastics, those are about increasing recycling rates, but quite a lot of the activity that we do around those areas is about reducing the amount of waste that we're producing overall. So we've got really big pieces of work that we've done around plastics and plastic packaging, and our kind of fountains program that we've done has really been focused on refill and getting people to reuse and make sure that they're kind of reducing that waste and it's not being produced in the first place. And similarly on food, a lot of our work is targeted on making sure that food isn't becoming waste to start with, and that's a huge part of delivering that, because that's about as we talked about earlier, is not just about recycling rates, it's about delivering improvements to the environment and the carbon and greenhouse gases as well.
Didn't sound quite like zero waste, but I hear where you were going with that. Wayne, I could sense you wanted to come in there.
Well, so we are where we are with the London Environment Strategy, and we're working hard to deliver what that strategy says. Like at a point in the future where we need to move beyond where we are now. I hear what Matthew's saying, and there are clear tensions between wanting to pursue a recycling strategy for its own sake and thinking about what is the outcome that you want to achieve. So at ReLondon, our business plan is predicated upon reducing consumption-based emissions. So that's a materials essentially based target. And reducing those consumption emissions must have an effect on waste arisings, although I can't tell you right now, because we haven't done the research, what that relationship is. But any strategy that thought about waste in the climate sphere should maybe consider how a consumption-based emissions target could be applied, what its relationship to stuff was, and how the circular economy played a role. So reducing waste would be key to that through sharing and leasing and recycling within kind of closed loops. So yes, I think there's a more sophisticated and nuanced way in the future that we should approach this. I don't think I would necessarily... I would say we should aim to really kind of ultimately and in the future bear down on waste. If you look at the C40 report, The Future of Urban Consumption 1.5 Degrees C World, it sets out quite clearly where consumption emissions need to go by 2050. And if you look at that, then the actions that we need to take to enable that by design are quite significant.
Excellent. That sounds like a recommendation for more research, if ever I've heard one. Talking of recommendations, a couple of years ago when I was chair of the committee with the only keeper as actually it was Tony Devonish as deputy chair, we did a piece of work around waste. And one of the recommendations was around circular economy to be embedded within the RRPs. Can I just ask, in agreeing this second round, how much was the circular economy embedded within making sure councils were fitting that into their RRPs? I guess it's both Wayne and Jemilah. Whoever wants to answer. Jemilah.
Yeah, so I think we definitely encourage boroughs to take on actions around like more circular economy, so encouraging them to take on things like reuse, repair, library of things, and take on initiatives like that to make sure that we are kind of embedding circular economy into that as well. I think we probably could do more around that, and I think, as we said, learning the lessons and thinking about what we could do more next time, I think that would be something that we would want to look at to make sure that we can support that and make that, build that into the process a bit more.
Thank you. I can see Wayne's indicating I'd be interested to know what more looks like.
Well, okay, so this has to be across the piece. This has to be a horizontal thing. It's not necessarily for local authorities at the waste collection front line. Clearly, circular economy is something they have to incorporate, but the circular economy is a much wider thing. So we need to provide the businesses and the SMEs, as well as have the infrastructure, as well as have the regulation. So what can we do? Well, at ReLondon, for example, we put a lot of effort, funded by UK SPF and the Mayor and others, into, we've just signed a contract with Southwark, for example, and we've done work with Islington in the past to promote circular economy businesses within the borough and within the city, which enables local authorities then to point at those circular economy businesses, whether they're repair, reuse, whether they're unpackaged shops, libraries of things. We've done work with I think it was Bexley on working with Olio in Kitch to help residents reduce waste. There's loads that we can do, but we need the businesses out there in order to do it. And I guess my point is, it's not just about the environment or waste or recycling. It's about business, skills, culture, as well as collection, and it's about growth and investment in a circular future rather than a linear future. And I think that's broader, is my meta point really, than the RRPs. So we work very closely trying to integrate all of that together, and it's quite an interesting and exciting picture that kind of goes beyond the scope of this committee, but there's loads of really interesting stuff there.
agree with everything you just said, apart from a bit it's about growth, but we'll get into a philosophical conversation.
Maybe I should say thriving.
There we go. Matthew, and then I'm going to pick up the pace.
So we had a commitment to develop a circular economy action plan built into our RRP because as a borough, we recognise the importance of it. It was reflected in our net zero carbon strategy, and we were one of the first London boroughs. One of the first boroughs, I think, nationally to produce a standalone circular economy action plan. But which has been great, but I mean, that was very much focused on kind of local actions. What can we do locally around planning and support local businesses and so on. And when Wayne talks about layers, circular economy exists at multiple layers, and Islington can't develop its own circular economy in Islington. And to some extent, I don't think London can either. Most of the waste, probably virtually all of the waste generated in London at some point or other originated outside London. And I think it's critical that you have a national policy framework that supports circular economy. So, and good examples of that, of course, EPR and DRS, which are hopefully eventually coming down the line. And that will impact on waste streams, it'll impact on design, it'll impact on the recyclability of materials, it'll actually impact on the way local authorities handle waste and the waste streams that we collect, which could impact on recycling rates. I think this is an important kind of factor to keep in mind. So, circular economy and waste reduction, you need that sort of, it's a global thing, of course, but at the very least you need a national policy framework which clearly drives what we're doing. And I think in Wales, Wales is a substantial area, and I think they've been very successful at having that national policy framework which has driven a lot of the success that they've had within that region.
Thank you.
And we're lacking that, I think, in England. At the risk of getting political, I think we have lacked that by comparison.
Phil, final comment on this, and
Very
then I'm going to move on.
As someone who works on the commercial side and the local authority side, sure. I don't see the RRPs being the driver in the local authority kind of procurement scheme. It's just not. It's more happening in the commercial schemes. Local authorities are pushed down to the bottom line, and it's always driving, and they don't necessarily take the best long-term deal for the best short-term deal. And that's what I see with most of the local authority contracts that we work with. Whereas our commercial schemes, which are on a shorter cycle because they can be, they take more of that circularity into it. Like, we've got a couple of our contracts where we follow the food into the store, into our bin, into our process, back to the field, back to the shop. So we've done that, and that's a real key driver for them choosing us as a business, and we're not necessarily the cheapest option they have. So you can see it and in the commercial when you put it out there, but I think more focus there's a lot of talk about the RRPs, but it's not focused in the bids and the decision makings, and you can see it in the scoring schemes. So it's where that happens.
Thank you. And Jemilah, just to return back to the RRPs, so I've got a question about the process for agreeing them. We've already heard about webinars and drop-in surgeries. Just to ask if there's any other part of the process you think it'd be helpful for us to know about, and also how in that process to ensure that they're sufficiently ambitious.
Yeah, so I think obviously, as Matt said, the kind of core part of it is ensuring that the boroughs are in general conformity with the Mayor's strategy. So we have a lot of discussions, especially where boroughs might not be in general conformity. So there is, on top of those kind of things, there are discussions directly, and we go through several rounds of feedback with most of these boroughs to make sure where areas where we see they can increase their ambition, we are doing that, and we do have specifically kind of targeted discussions where we do want to see, especially like food waste, and making sure that we're kind of bringing in, kind of pushing them to do as much as possible to bring in those things and bring in services that we want to see.
Thank you. And what actions can the Mayor take to ensure compliance from boroughs?
So I think obviously we have annual review for each of these, for each of the RRPs, and they, part of the approval process is to, boroughs we say we approve them on the basis that they will do what they say they will do, and we will keep having those discussions with them. So I think mainly it's about making sure that we're having those discussions and following up with them to make through those annual review processes to make sure they're actually implementing what they say they will do.
Thank you. Rachel, if I can bring you in here. Part 2 of the RRPs include information about the cost of changes to RRPs. How much are councils and waste authorities investing in recycling and waste management services?
That's a good question. I can only speak obviously from the view of my authority, but we have already made significant investments in recycling. We have our own material recovery facility on site, which allows for all of the boroughs to bring in commingled dry recyclables into the facility and have those recycled. So in terms of what investment's been made already, that's significant. There's obviously more investment that needs to be made. For example, at the moment we don't have anywhere to bulk food waste, but that's certainly something that we're looking into. We're investigating that, and we're actively talking to the boroughs regularly about that and how they might bring the waste into us, how it might be presented, and what might be the best options for them. And one of those options might be that we don't have a bulking facility. Maybe they already have other arrangements which are sort of economically better. So those are discussions that we're having at the moment.
That's really helpful. Matthew, this second round of RRPs, how do they differ from the first one, and what would you say has been progress?
I mean, the RRPs were shorter, and I think that was necessitated because of the uncertainty around the national policy framework. I mean, uncertainty being a exaggeration, perhaps. But as I said earlier, I think in many ways the process was simpler because we were familiar with it. The templates and so on have been streamlined. We understood the framework we were working in terms of the London Environment Strategy and the process we had to go through. And as a local authority, of course, we were familiar with the concept of RRPs, and this wasn't a new thing. It was really a refresh, a rewrite of what we already had, and a sort of an evolution of our waste and recycling strategy. And I think it was an opportunity to kind of learn from some of the commitments we had in the first RRP, and to what extent we've been able to deliver on those, and learn from that, so that we could be more realistic, sort of second time round, or more ambitious, perhaps.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Wayne, could I ask you, from your point of view, what the second round included in this updated list, and how they differ from the first one? And if Matthew's covered it, don't feel the need to.
Yeah, I've got nothing further to add on that.
Perfect, thank you. Jemilah, could I ask you what work's been done to understand the potential impact of these actions, so the second round of RRPs?
So we're in the process of doing that now. So the project that I mentioned earlier that we and ReLondon are doing, so it's kind of one of the elements of that is around the RRPs, so looking at the best practice that we can share, but also trying to understand where we can, the impact of those. We've already done some work that ReLondon have done around looking at analysing the waste that's being produced in London and the impact that different factors might have. So some of that is around the national legislation, and we can start to have a look at what the impact of the RRPs may be as well. But it's in process.
Thank you. And I don't know if that's the same process. London Data Store states new analysis will be developed and shared in autumn 2023. Could I ask if you know when this will be published?
I will check. I'm not sure quite what that refers to, but our project will probably go on to spring next year, but we'll review when that to actually be published, but probably.
Brilliant. If you're happy to write to the committee just to clarify that would be brilliant. And then finally, the current round of RRPs cover the period from April 2023 to the end of March 2025. What are the plans beyond March 2025?
In terms of the RRP process?
Exactly. The process, and also, well, yeah, let's stick with the process for now, but I guess more widely as well, with waste reduction and recycling rates.
Yeah, so I think we've only just completed, just about completed this process, and I think we're thinking now about the annual review, which will be kind of the middle of next year. So I think we will, as I said, we'll try to learn lessons from this process and understand what we'll do next year. I think there's still quite a lot of changes that are probably going to come over in the next few years. So I think we'll have to look at those and look at the impact of those. And obviously we have an election, so I think we will have to take all of those things into account. But at the moment, I think we'll be planning for another round of RRPs that will come in at that stage. I think we will want to probably review whether we want to do a similar process that we've done this time. But yeah, we definitely want to learn lessons and see how we can change those going forward. But at the moment, that would be the plan.
And I suppose whether it stays at 2 years or 4 years, but you'll know that depending on the success of it. My final question, I suppose it's either for Wayne or anyone who wants to answer it, is around home delivery. So I think it's just been discussed, a lot of London's waste doesn't come from London. I went on a committee visit. I think I was the only person here who was on the visit to Amazon to where they were using cargo bikes. But I chatted to their sustainability crew about how much kind of waste is done in home delivery, and they gave me some nice words about what they were doing, but I've not seen any kind of effective action since then. Are you doing any work with organisations like Amazon?
The answer is, short answer is no. We do talk to Amazon, and we have links into Amazon. What we are doing, though, is we're about to engage another piece of research, but it is going to be interesting. We have a series of material flow analyses. We've done one on food, one on clothing and textiles, that takes this consumption-based emissions approach and looks at where our waste comes from, where our emissions come from, and where they go through London, through the system, and then tries to figure out how we can effectively make the best interventions to have the biggest effect in the system. And we're going to do one on packaging and materials in our next round of material flow analysis. So we'll be a lot better informed on how and where we can make effective interventions into the system. But the point, I think, that you've all made is, yes, a lot of London's stuff comes from outside of London, in fact, outside of the UK.
Perfect. It sounds like important work. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think on the point about Amazon, extended producer responsibility might have a small impact on some of their practices. And just on the point that was being made by Jemilah about working with ReLondon to identify areas of good practice and share them, when we did the investigation between 2016 and 18, Ealing was right at the bottom, doing very, very badly, and they implemented some changes that they told us that they were going to implement. And looking at the sort of heat map of who's doing well in London, Ealing now seems to be in a very, very different place. So I hope there'll be some learning from that could be shared, and possibly even shared with us. I'm going to move on, though. I'm going to bring in Dr. Onka Sahota.
Well, first of all, Chair, I'm delighted about the good news about Ealing, in the area which I represent here. My question is about the impact of the government announcements, and so it's an opener for anyone who wants to take it, is to what are your views on the government's recent announcements on the food waste and standardisation recycling collections? Do they go far enough? Yes.
Turn on your mic, Matt, I think.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to clarify the question. So, do you want to?
I think I could jump in. It's fantastic news that we've been waiting for a long time, and to see any action in this, the standardisation of what we get, is brilliant. But the thing is, it's going to drive a lot of more food into the marketplace. There's about AD is the preferred way that DEFRA have said to process food waste. There's 8 ADs in and around London. 4 of them are inside the M25, 4 outside. 2 of those support boroughs that aren't within London. So one is filled by Essex waste. So there actually isn't, there's probably about capacity for 500,000 tonnes of food waste processed within London and around it. This is probably going to give us access to close to 1 million, and the commercial facilities are going to fill it first. So there might not be enough capacity because of these rules in AD, in the preferred way to do it, to process it. So it's about helping the businesses support and then open up areas where additional revenues can be built and additional capacity when the ADs or new ADs, because that's going to hit very quickly before the council's regulations come in 2026, because 2025 will probably be filled by early adopters of services.
I think the AD is going to be picked up later on in the next section, so we will come into that. So I don't want to tread over toes on that issue. Okay, the next question is to Jemilah and Rachel and Ray. Is what will the impact be on London Borough's waste authorities of the government announcements to introduce food waste collections to the all households by March 2026?
sorry, I wasn't sure if you were asking Ray or myself. So in terms of the collection arrangements or the disposal arrangements?
I presume it's a collection arrangement.
Well, within our 4 boroughs, our collection authorities are already starting trials, and some are more beyond the stage of trials in their boroughs for collecting food waste. So in terms of the impact, obviously there's a cost implication there, there's an operational implication with separate vehicles being needed, and there's also an operational implication with where the food waste is going to go. So all of those 3 things have to be resolved in tandem for them to be able to effectively deliver a service and meet this requirement. As I say, they are already doing trials, and they already have arrangements for the amount of material that they currently collect. But as those expansions take place and they go borough-wide, then the amount of food waste will, we anticipate, go up. So therefore, we need to start looking at how we can make arrangements for them to bring that waste to a central point, or be it through other contracts that already exist. And as a colleague said earlier, that the impact on the capacity of AD that's already there is going to have a significant effect on them being able to do this.
And will there be any financial incentives to change over to a new way of doing things over the existing contracts?
In terms of collection or disposal?
Both.
I can't really speak about their collection contracts, because obviously we don't hold those and I don't know the detail of those. But with regard to our disposal contract, there is no limitation on the amount of waste that boroughs can divert for recycling. We don't have any guaranteed minimum tonnages, so they are at liberty to divert waste away for recycling purposes.
Yes, Matthew, and then
thank you. I mean, the announcement, now that it's finally come, I think is welcome. As an authority, we're committed to providing our residents food waste recycling services, and most of them already have it. But I think there's a number of questions, a number of issues around the announcement. Funding is an issue. It's a new burden, and the government are committed to providing new burden funding, but we don't know the level of that funding. We don't know how it will be applied. Wayne alluded earlier to whether capital funding to enable the rollout will penalise boroughs who in the meantime have just got on with it, such as Islington. We don't know whether the new burdens funding to support these services, the funding that comes to us, will be given on one hand and taken away in the grant on the other hand. It seems unlikely to me that this government will give us money for this service without having some other arrangement to sort of offset that. That seems like a genuine risk. The supply chain for containers, for vehicles, is a genuine risk. And as I said earlier, we can provide all of these services. We can offer all of these services to householders, but there is nothing that requires householders to use them. There's nothing that requires landlords to facilitate these collections. We've been knocking on landlords' doors saying we need to provide you with your residents with food waste services, and unless they return our calls, unless they give us fobs, access codes, allow the bins on their site, we cannot provide the service to the residents. And I don't believe there's any reasonable measure that we can take against the landlord who may be blocking the service to their residents, and certainly not to the residents who may choose not to use those services. So it's great that we have to provide the services, but if nobody uses them...
But why would landlords be blocking them?
They're just generally disinterested. They don't want extra bins on their block. They may feel there's no space. They may feel the bins are going to be smelly. They might just be absent landlords who you can't contact in the first place, in which case our approach just tends to be stick the bin in anyway and wait for them to complain. Generally landlords are amenable and open, but they're not all that compliant.
Thank you. Wayne?
Yeah, notwithstanding Matthew's points, I would just emphasise that there are some unknowns around the funding. Particularly London and other dense urban environments will have very specific issues around introducing food waste into flats. we've got the recycling package, the flats recycling package. Will that be appropriately funded? Will London be recognised as having difficulties in terms of transients, communications, the proper infrastructure, and the difficulties that communal recycling brings with it? I hope so, but they're not answered. Ongoing funding of caddies and liners, that kind of thing. So there are questions. So whilst we welcome the overall announcement, the actual details of the implementation of it are still to be worked out, and there's a consultation ongoing, and if any London boroughs haven't responded appropriately to that consultation, I would encourage them to do so.
Yes, Ray.
Just to finally add on, in the big picture sort of terms, about half of English local authorities currently collect food waste in one shape, way or form. Some do it co-collected with garden waste, some do it individually. And as Matthew said, it's the infrastructure around all of this. If everybody's going to market at the same time to get vehicles and bins and one thing and another, that's going to be logistically a nightmare. We've got till 2026 in order to get our acting gear. And that's going to be a tough challenge for the sector to provide the right vehicles, to provide the right sorts of containers. We still haven't got around the issue of whether caddy liners are allowed or not. The government have procrastinated on that one at the moment. Further research is needed. But you're going to have to get over that issue, because there is still the yuck factor that people don't want to get involved in recycling household food waste. It's smelly, it's horrible. We just don't want it in our kitchen. So you've got to do it in a way which brings the public on board and the operators, and we'll come on to the AD infrastructure at some point later as well.
And also, and what will be the impact of extended producer responsibility beyond local authorities when it's introduced in October 2025? Will it potentially reduce the income from recycling if less packaging is produced? Yes, Jemilah.
So I think we're still trying to work out what the impact of that will be, and we've done, ReLondon have been doing some research. I think there are some concerns around the kind of interaction between EPR and consistency, and making sure that those are actually joined up and they support, local authorities to implement the services that they need to implement. I think the payments from extended producer responsibility have been delayed for a year, which I think will impact local authorities and their ability to implement those services and take procurements. But also there isn't clarity at the moment at the amount of funding that will be available through EPR, and whether or not that will be at the level that will actually support the boroughs to implement those services. So there's a little bit of conflict, I think, at the moment between that and the consistency that's come out in terms of the consistency legislation, or simpler recycling as it is now, has put forward things like commingled services and co-collection of garden and food waste, and trying to understand what that means for effective and efficient services under EPR, which will govern payments. And there's still some uncertainty there about what an efficient and effective service will look like and what that will impact. So I think there's still some uncertainty for local authorities and waste authorities in putting those services in place about what they need to do in order to make sure that they're getting the payment that will cover that service. So I think, there's some further impacts there and things that need to be worked out.
Thank you.
As Jemilah says, it's this interaction between consistency, or simpler recycling as they're calling it now, and effective and efficient collections. DEFRA, I actually asked the question of DEFRA a couple of weeks ago on a webinar, and they haven't got an answer for that yet. That's a worry, considering it's going to come around very quickly in 2025. We need to get a handle on this, and the government needs to get a handle on this. And what's not helping matters at the moment, I don't want to get political here, but we have an election coming up next year. This thing could get kicked into the long grass if we're not careful, and we need to be mindful of that.
And I think we've already touched on the kind of challenges that exist in London, and we know that London may find it harder to get recycling rates up. So if things like that are based on recycling rates, not only does that make it more challenging for London, but as we talked about, and Zach's question around, we're looking to reduce waste and remove that from them. So the impact of that is going to have on services, and we don't want to have perverse incentives that are not supporting us moving in the right direction.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to move on to some more questions, this time about food waste collection and AD from both Assembly Member Polanski and myself. But I just wanted to quickly come back to something that Rachel said very carefully, which was that there is no limit in terms of diverting waste from the recycling, but does the same apply to diverting food waste away from the waste stream?
Thank you. That's a very good question, and one I will be very careful in answering. It comes down to what the definition of your food waste recycling entails. So if the waste is going to in-vessel composting, for example, is that a recycling process in the same way as anaerobic digestion, or is anaerobic digestion regarded as an energy production process? And that's an issue that we are actively pursuing at the moment, which I know you're aware of.
Just if I could step in, would you agree that with DEFRA that AD is the best way to dispose of food waste?
I'm going to try and stop the members of the panel
it's just
asking.
An ask. It's a waste authority. And
I'm terribly sorry, but generally speaking, and I'm going to be.
Is there a conflict there, Leon?
I'm going to be a bit of I'm going to be a bit chairish, which is that we normally try and discourage the guests from asking each other questions. Sorry about that.
Would any of the Assembly members like to ask that question?
well, they may do, or they may not do. But the next couple of questions are going to be about food waste collection and anaerobic digestion, and I'm going to start by passing over to Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you. I'm going to go straight to Rachel. I'm very tempted to ask a question, but I'll allow you to choose whether or not. But more generally, what progress has there been in increasing food waste collection in London in both domestic and non-domestic settings?
In London in general, from my wider knowledge, I'm aware that many authorities are initiating trials in food waste collections across their boroughs, and certainly within our four, all four of them are running pilots of varying sizes. One at least is borough-wide. And so I believe that there has been a significant improvement and investment in that, but there's obviously more to be done, and certainly with the delays in implementing consistency as was now simpler recycling, things have been certainly held up in that sphere.
Thanks. I think the Chair's going to come on more specifically to AD shortly. Phil, can I ask you the same question? What progress has been made?
In the time before the simpler recycling, there's been kind of individual through the authority. So West London Waste Authority has wide-scale food recycling, which we will collect about 40,000 tonnes annually of it. Just so the committee knows, it's a great product. The domestic food waste, because we've talked about contamination, is less contaminated than the commercial food waste. So the ADs actually really like this product and want to get as much of the household in. And DEFRA agrees, all the legislation agrees that AD is the best way for it. So I think there's been scalable kind of improvements, and with the announcement that's made, we can actually kind of push out. I love seeing what's happening with the high rise, because that's on our mind. How are we going to get access to that? Because this is a product that our facility powers about 11,000 homes from what we do. Our trucks run on the gas that we make. It's a carbon neutral kind of collection service and everything. We don't use any fossil fuels in the process. So it is a sustainable way of doing it, and we can keep going because it's from farm to fork, and then from fork back to the farm, back to our process. So it is really positive.
Thank you. Jemilah.
Yeah, just to say, I think in kind of household now we have 25 out of the 33 boroughs who do collect food waste, and that's gone up from 23 when Sadiq was elected mayor. And we have been working really closely, and food waste collection has been kind of a real important aspect of our process. And as you said, we've got further boroughs who are running trials, and most of the rest, except from Tower Hamlets, I believe, have committed to do that within the timescale of the national legislation, which sounds simple, but with the contractual barriers and things in London, it could have been less. So I think we are making good progress, and I think that will be really positive. I think the commercial, as we've said earlier, that remains a challenge because we don't necessarily have the data to do that, but we do have work, and ReLondon supports local authorities to implement kind of commercial collection services, and we encourage that through the RRPs, and we do have 9 of the local authorities who do now have food waste collection services.
I've seen hands from Matthew and Phil, but can I just come back to you, Jemilah, just briefly? So 25 out of 33, which are the ones that are not doing it, and what's the timetable for them to introduce it?
Give me a moment.
Sure.
Just what she does, if I could interject, what we've seen actually with COVID and the cost of living crisis is, so I don't want to judge it just on tonnages and push through the recycling. We've seen people level off the cost of living, so they're doing the right thing. They're not producing as much food waste, which is the best thing. So we should kind of entrust the boroughs to keep that message up, that we don't want it unless it's really necessary and it goes in. The best thing you can do with food is eat it or not buy it if you don't need it, and see that. So it's not just measuring how much we're getting through, it's that it's the right kind of waste that's coming into us, and people are avoiding waste now, and we're seeing that in the figures.
Thank you, Matthew, and then I'll come back to Jemilah for the data.
Well, I think, this issue of, we collect food waste because our residents want it, but also because we want to achieve higher recycling rates, but more importantly than that, it is a more sustainable way of managing that part of the waste stream from a carbon emissions perspective. And I think we talk about recycling rates, but recycling food waste is the right thing to do because of the impact on carbon emissions. My understanding is AD is better in that respect than in vessel. Both of them are better than landfill and incineration. But of course, even better than that is avoiding the food waste in the first place. So, it's that focus on what is it we're trying to achieve, and I think net zero carbon should be right at the top of the hierarchy.
May everyone hear you say it loud and clear. Jemilah. Sorry, Mike.
Sorry. So Wandsworth and Hammersmith and Fulham are bringing in, or have committed to bring in food waste, separate food waste collections in this RRP period, and then we'll have Barnet, Kensington and Chelsea, Barking and Dagenham, Newham, Redbridge, Havering, Hillingdon, and Greenwich and Waltham Forest will be bringing it in line with government requirements.
Thank you. And then the final question from me is, what work is the Mayor doing to connect restaurants, hospitals, restaurants, I guess hospitals to shops with food waste that is usable with community groups and charities to make sure that it's not going through processes it doesn't need to go through if it could literally be eaten?
Yeah, so I think we've done quite a lot of work on food, and it's kind of not necessarily specifically just on those sectors, but working with organisations. So we've been, we did a kind of the food analysis to look at the material flows, where those were going from. We had some commitments that came out of that. And so one of those was to kind of lead by example, and then the other one was to produce a pathway. So that's what we're doing at the moment, which I mentioned earlier. We have a report that's looking at how we can deliver our food waste targets, and that covers kind of where waste is in the hospitality and public sector as well. And then we also kind of convened a roundtable for food. I'll probably have to take it away and come back to you specifically on the public sector.
That's okay. This might be a question you can't answer, but I remember a few years ago, this was even before I got into politics, saying to a restaurant, what do you do with your food when you're done? And they said they wouldn't give it away because it would undermine the pricing for customers. I can't remember. I think maybe it was McDonald's or so. It was one of the big. Are you aware of that kind of narrative still going on? I can see Wayne waving.
Yeah, so I think we've done, like food redistribution has been a big push. So the Mayor's been working really closely with different organisations and charities to make sure that we can increase that. So we've had a project called Food Connect, which has done that to make sure that we are taking food and redistributing that, which I think created 7 green jobs, and also redistributed 150 tons of food waste that could have otherwise would have been wasted. So there's huge numbers of benefits that have come from that. But yeah, we recently had a roundtable with businesses here in City Hall, so bringing together the whole supply chain. So that included kind of producers, manufacturers, distributors, restaurants and others. So that was not just on kind of, more broadly about what you can do about food waste, and redistribution was one of those discussions, and we're just thinking about how we can take forward some of the actions there. But there are lots of good examples of businesses doing some of this themselves, and so we want to kind of support that and facilitate it. But there are lots of good initiatives out there that are already supporting that kind of thing.
What we do in business with a lot of our customers is because we get a lot of MI from our bins, and when they reach a certain point, the trigger point, we'll communicate with the restaurants that your food waste has gone up 5, 10, 15%, and it's usually because they're over procuring, because they were based on in the summer period. If they're busy in the season, they may have wanted extra food bought in. So we'll tell them that. I don't know if that's something that could go out to the householders, if you could ever check in what individually they're producing and then let them know that they're putting it out. But it's a great way of putting them into check to say, you've produced this amount of food in this month and you've wasted it not going in. So we go back to our customers and say, you produced 70 kilos this week. You normally produce 30 kilos. Is there a reason for that? And then they can change their behaviour habits and procure more at the point and then produce less food.
Sounds ideal. Wayne, did you still want to come in?
Well, just to say, I think on the point that you raised, Too Good To Go is really popular. So apps like Too Good To Go, Olio, and Kitch, they're just kind of really useful for food distribution, for food that's at the end of the day that restaurants need, want to sell off that would have gone to waste, but they can kind of sell off at a discounted price, or just sharing food. Just to Phil's point, Kitch is a really good way that householders can monitor their food usage, see what's going out of date in their fridge. It's an app. Anyone can download it. So there's lots of tools out there that we have supported in London through ReLondon's business support and others that have supported. And my point is that local authorities can leverage that by making these tools available to citizens to use, and other businesses as well. And so it's not just about, for example, home composting or just communications messages. You have to have the businesses as well who can help and encourage citizens to reduce their waste and their food waste as well.
Love Too Good To Go, although there's not a vegan box, but I'm presuming you're not responsible for that, so I'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Phil, actually, because you've already referred to the number of AD plants around London. I just want to check, you are referring to anaerobic digestion for food, and you're not including the Thames water facilities in your list here?
No, I'm not.
No, just checking, because they have both aerobic and anaerobic digesters, but it deals with other matters, which we've also discussed here. So do you think that the Mayor has been very obviously encouraging setting up more anaerobic digestion? Because you've just indicated, I think it would be fair to say, that with the changes that are just coming through from the latest from the government, that facilities at the moment deal with 500,000 tonnes, and you're saying there could be 1 million tonnes of food available. Where are we in terms of encouraging the construction of additional AD, or...?
The legislation has changed, and the schemes that we're signed up to are closed. So the renewable heat incentive schemes are closed to new facilities in the terms that we would make it agreeable for new ADs to be built. So I think I don't know whether the Mayor has issues with that, but he could certainly leverage that the REGOs, the RCHI schemes that are there are reopened, or even incentivised at a better scale for new facilities to be built. Because it's dependent when you come onto the scheme, where you are and how you're producing. So it's not financially viable to build new ADs and compete with the ones that are already in existence at that level.
Okay, so how are we going to get the expansion of AD facilities that we might need to move from 500,000 tonnes of food waste going to AD and 1 million tonnes? Because it's doubling, basically.
I think the market will change that. Previously, because there wasn't enough tonnage in the marketplace, and AD plants were filling the excess by buying it in. I think this excess tonnage will change the marketplace, probably go from a negative gate fee to a positive gate fee where people have to pay, which the older contracts are. So I think this extra feedstock will incentivise the marketplace to open them, but then there has to be planning for them, because people don't want an AD plant in their backyard. As one of the most central AD plants, it can be difficult to work with residents, to where you are, how you get through. Then there's the facilities of transporting our digestate through lagoons. So there has to be an open discussion about, yes, we need extra facilities, where are they going to go, and is the planning going to be made applicable for these facilities to be built?
So I'm going to now turn to Rachel, if I may, and then I'm going to bring in Ray, because I can see he's keen to come in on this. But, I mean, obviously, Phil was just outlining the fact that it might be more of an incentive, and indeed there might be a positive gate fee for food waste once it's separated to go to AD. Is that the kind of thing that changes the mind of the waste authorities across London to think about themselves possibly finding a space on one of the sites already managed for AD to be constructed?
Yeah, it does depend on how the payment mechanism works between the WCAs and the WDA. In some cases, it wouldn't have an impact at all. In our area, it would, because we pay as you go, effectively. So if you divert waste for recycling, then you see an immediate impact on the amount of money that you spend on waste disposal. So certainly in our area, it would have an impact.
Right. Ray, there's a bit of a conundrum here, isn't it? We need to change.
We do, yes.
We need to change quite quickly, because the government has now announced that we need to do things by 2025 and 2026. But at the moment, we don't really have the capacity to move towards the government's preferred option of anaerobic digestion for food waste.
Can I just pick up on a point that Phil mentioned just now? Yes, the RHI has closed, but the Green Gas Support Scheme has been launched. So there is a support mechanism for AD plants now for the next 15 years to inject gas into the grid. So that should encourage some development. The other thing, which is sometimes
might not be of great significance to Phil and biocollectors, because I think they're already doing it. So I don't think you'll be getting much of an incentive. No, because it's already happening.
But
there you go.
For new plants, maybe, yeah. The other thing, from a London point of view, is also the availability of land from a planning point of view. Waste facilities very seldom feature in planning plans, kind of thing. I'm not an expert on this by any stretch of the imagination, but because of the price of land in London, there's better things to build on a plot of land than an anaerobic digestion plant, which is going to be smelly and lagoons and one thing or another, with the potential maybe of going off bang occasionally as well, as some of them have done. But yes, we do need to get on with it. We do need to build the infrastructure. We do need the collection facilities to do it. We do need to be local as well. We did some work at Veolia some years ago with Southampton University about food waste collections, and the carbon impact of moving this stuff around. And you need to keep it quite close to the point of origin in order for it to stack up from a carbon point of view. So keeping it within the London area is definitely a plus from that point of view. Making it going outside London area, the further you have to travel, the less kind of carbon sense it makes. You end up spending more by way of carbon emissions from the vehicles than you do by saving the carbon emissions from collecting and digesting material in the first place.
So Wayne, do you actually think there is currently sufficient capacity for expanding AD across London if food waste collections actually increase?
It doesn't sound like it. I mean, in terms of like capacity within London currently, but what I would say is that, what would I say? Well, the trick is, I think, in all of this, is to figure out what capacity you need as waste declines, and not figure out what capacity you need as waste goes up. The point here is that we should be recycling, digesting inedible food waste and not edible food waste. And we've talked about this before. There is a tension here between seeking to increase your recycling rates in the wet side of things, so that green and food waste, at the expense of what you should be doing, which is reducing edible food waste. So I think we just got to find that right balance. So I'm not answering your question kind of like yes or no, but what I do think it's really important that when we come to do the next London plan and the next phase of planning for waste, we figure out how much capacity we don't need.
So Jemilah, is that something that the GLA team is starting to grapple with, how we reduce food waste but at the same time we increase AD to deal with that food waste that we need to deal with?
Yes, I think we've been thinking about this, and I think also that in the National Infrastructure Committee report they did kind of identify that anaerobic digestion is an area that we do need to increase capacity, not specifically in London, but I think that's probably reflective. But I think at the moment we've been starting to think about the impact of the national legislative reforms as well, and there's still some uncertainty around the collection of food waste and whether it can be collected with garden waste, and I think we need to understand the impacts of that and whether or not that would impact on how local authorities are treating that waste. But I think, so in broadly, I think there are still questions around the actual amount of waste that we will be generating and how that will decrease over time. So I think we do need to do some work to understand that, but I think we should be thinking a bit more, but I think it's still quite hard at this point to know what the level of capacity we do need.
Thank you. Can I just remind you and Phil to turn your mics off? And I'm now going to move on to our final questions, which are with Assemblymember McCartney and then Assemblymember Best. And we'll turn first to Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask about incineration. London has the lowest proportion of waste that goes to landfill, but we have the highest proportion that goes to incineration. Can I ask the panel, is there sufficient progress to reduce the proportion of recyclable material that we currently incinerate? You can shake or
no.
nod. No.
A lot of that would be food. We've discussed it's going to incineration, and it's going down to be and you create about 25% more carbon by incinerating food than sending it to AD. London is a high dense population, so incineration will need to be part of its place, but too much single-use items go into incineration and too much food goes into incineration, and part of that is the biggest change that I've seen probably in my time in waste was the landfill tax. It's still kind of incentivised with low gate fees for councils through apathy to send stuff to incineration, because it just makes more sense to send on one vehicle to incineration than rather have 4 or 5 different vehicles working collecting these avenues. So right now with the gate fees the way they are and the incentives, you will not see a massive change in people will not want to send that bulk to incineration.
It's more expensive.
Yeah.
Right.
It's likely to become more expensive in 2028 though, because energy from waste facilities will enter what is known as the UK emissions trading scheme.
Yeah.
That will come in at about the same time as the biodegradable landfill ban into England comes into, which is about 2028. The dynamics of that will mean a couple of things. It could drive out fossil carbon from the waste stream, which is generally the plastics, the single-use items and stuff like that. That has an effect on the calorific value of the material itself, which may affect its heat generation and its electricity generation, but we'll come on to the technical stuff of that later if you want to afterwards. But the fear is with that is that the gate fees will go up significantly. We estimated in our consultation response to the Department in Business and Environment, Net Zero, that will be somewhere between £40 to £60 per tonne. So that will be a comparable figure to landfill. The danger is if you go too far the other way, you could inadvertently incentivise landfill. By making the landfill tax and the gate fee cheaper than incineration. So we've kind of recommended to government that they should keep pace with each other so one doesn't disincentivise the other, so you don't get perverse outcomes. The other negative impact of that could be there could be a propensity to export waste, as RDF or SRF, to Europe, but particularly European countries that don't have an incineration tax or something like that. So there's a lot of dynamics here at play, but I suppose the bottom line is it will fundamentally affect the makeup of the waste stream, because you'll be taxed on the fossil content of it, not the biogenic content. So depends on where you are in the country. It ranges from between 45 fossil to 55 fossil, depending on your collection contracts. But that could fundamentally affect the dynamics of waste incineration going forward.
Okay, that's very. I'll come back to that in a minute, actually. But Matthew, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, a couple of points briefly. I think that there used to be a sort of reasonably valid argument that energy from waste, combined heat and power, and so on it wasn't great, but at least you were recovering some kind of value and energy from the waste stream. And I think as the energy grid decarbonises, that argument is diminishing. Energy from waste is being seen as a sort of, essentially a carbon emitter, and not the best way to deal with waste. So I think carbon capture and storage relating to these facilities is, really, really important. I'm not an expert, and I know it's technically extremely difficult, but it feels intuitively that sort of these facilities should go hand in hand with carbon capture and storage, and that there needs to be far more support, funding, and so on into that research and into that technology. I think if I can make just one more point, though, that energy from waste facilities are there because we throw out rubbish. We as residents and businesses produce rubbish, and the facilities are all there, the recycling facilities are all there, but for one reason or another, a vast amount of recyclable material and food waste and so on goes into the residual waste stream, which waste disposal authorities and unitary authorities have to manage. They have to manage that waste stream. So, they are there because we are throwing away perfectly good materials that, I come back to my point earlier about compulsion and enforcement and so on, we can't do that. And so, we have to manage the problem in some way. And energy from waste is not great, but there is a lot of stuff that we have to deal with.
Okay, I'm going to come on to this because I've got a range of questions. I apologise, Chair. But, for example, I represent Enfield and Haringey, part of North London Waste Authority, and, of course, controversy with regards to the Edmonton incinerator. I think there's a range of issues. One is whether there was a strand to actually pick out recyclable material before it went to incineration, but also the planned capacity of the new incinerator to be built and be online by 2025 is a third more than the current facility. So I think there's a real issue about overcapacity in London, particularly when we've been talking today about the need to drive down waste, and that's where we're going to. So, do we have overcapacity of incineration, and what will that mean to these incinerators that are coming online or being built? Are we, rather than exporting, are we going to be importing it, or is that are the economics not going to be working? I'll start with Matthew and then get to Rachel, if I can.
Well, I obviously represent Islington Council, not the North London Waste Authority, and we're, our executive member is a vice chair, and NLWA. We work in very, very close partnership. But as a collection authority, we're absolutely committed to, diverting as much waste as we can from the residual waste stream by reducing it and by recycling it. So, the existence of a new facility, which is desperately needed. I mean, that the existing one is it the oldest legal operating energy from waste plant in the world, probably. So it needs to be replaced. The capacity, there's a question mark there, but it does not impact as a collection authority, and I'm sure the same is the case for Enfield and the other constituent boroughs. It doesn't impact on our drive to avoid waste at source.
Rachel.
Yeah, just to pick up the point about capacity, currently West London Waste Authority export their residual waste outside of London to a facility in the West Country in Bristol. So currently you could argue there isn't sufficient capacity for the local authority collections themselves. When you look at the wider waste stream, including all commercial waste as well, that picture looks more bleak. We're currently looking at that ourselves in terms of the future of our own arrangements, and the total arisings within the London area are large, and that includes commercial waste, some of which is currently also leaving the country and going to facilities in Europe. So there's a question mark over whether we have sufficient capacity at the moment and for the future. I just wanted to pick up as well about our own situation and with regard to removing recyclable waste from incinerators. Around about 75% of the waste that we manage is presented to us as residual waste. So we need to find a home for that. That's our statutory duty and our primary aim for existence. But within that, we do composition analyses regularly, and the most recent one showed that around 37% of that residual waste was currently recyclable in the collections that the boroughs are already running. So this sort of feeds right back to our first question, really, about encouraging better use of the collections we've already got.
Yeah, thank you. I think Ray had a hand up, then I'll come back to Jemilah. But Ray, I'm particularly interested as well, because I do wonder about overcapacity. And I think the Mayor has said he believes there's overcapacity in London of incineration. But also, because a lot of that is now linked to district heat networks, there could be a perverse incentive to need to be importing and burning to feed district heat networks. I don't know, Ray, whether you have any...
as far as I'm aware, only one facility is a district heat network. That's the cell chip one in Lewisham.
Enfield, Edmonton
will have one.
Will be having one, yeah.
My experience with district heat networks is they're not quite as easy as they sound.
Absolutely, yeah.
The cell chip one took a long time to get off the ground, a couple of decades almost from memory, to come up with such a small heat network. Unless you build it in an area where you can actually start from scratch, it's very difficult to retrofit a heat network. Heat network will have a benefit from a UK ETS point of view, because that will offset some of your trading allowances as well. So there is a benefit there from that sort of point of view. But coming back to Matthew's point, as well as about CCUS, London isn't in an industrial cluster, so it won't have access to the CO2 infrastructure to get it out to the North Sea. And at the moment, there is no support for that mechanism to do it by rail or road. So CCUS, from a London point of view, probably won't make sense from an access point of view, and probably won't make sense from a footprint point of view, because you look at most incinerators, they're built on a very small footprint. Adding a CCS unit to that is an incredibly difficult challenge from an engineering point of view, nonetheless. So district heat networks, yes, great. Whether there's too much capacity, I think that depends on your point of view. Permitted capacity, the latest Tolvik report says maybe, but actual capacity is a different issue. What's permitted and what's actually taken in at any given time are two different figures, and you can never really get to the bottom of that second figure.
Yeah, thank you. Can I come to Jemilah then for the GLA's position, because it is controversial. It is controversial in my area, although there obviously is the need to get rid of that residual waste. So can I ask you about the overcapacity, but also we're hearing about perhaps some of the future issues around the economics of incineration in the future as well. Is that some concerns that the GLA shares?
Yes, I think, like, the Mayor has been clear that kind of opposes any new incineration capacity, and we do think there is overcapacity in London in terms of incineration. And I think we have been, working, as we talked earlier about the capacity in general and infrastructure, and you know, it can be quite difficult to work out that, and we should be planning more for the future and what kind of infrastructure we want to deal with the waste that we expect to have. So we have been working quite or lobbying with the Environment Agency, because we feel that that's a thing that should be taken more into account as they're permitting those. That, you know, the process, the way it's set up at the moment, doesn't really take in account the things that we think are important in taking these decisions. In terms of, I think capacity is one of them, making sure that we are not creating overcapacity and then importing waste into London, and also, you know, with the environmental impacts and things that go on top of that. But also, they're actually considering what capacity is needed in London, and that's not part of the process at the moment. And I think it's something that we think should be better taken into account. So we've been working with them to try and work out what things we could do to improve that process to better take into account the needs of London, and make sure that that's taken into account how they're permitting and approving further capacity. But yeah, I think obviously quite a lot of these are approved through development consent orders, so the Mayor has a limited ability to actually impact that, and obviously that's something that is challenging, but we continue to oppose it when we have the chance.
Thank you. And Wayne, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I mean, just again, as a general comment, we really need at some point, maybe as a country, as a city, to start thinking about and planning for a reduction in waste and making policies to enable us to do that. And I think at the moment we tend to assume that waste is always going to be there, and so we plan for it to always be there, and it kind of perpetuates itself. So we have to recognise that we have a responsibility and a duty to manage waste appropriately, and that will require us to have facilities to do that. And those facilities tend to be very high capital and have long payback periods. But within the lifetime of those facilities, we have to work out what our expected and hoped for and planned for arisings are, and we have to have the appropriate policies and plans and funding in place to enable that to happen, and not the reverse. So at the moment, we plan for waste to go up, and we really need to plan for it to go down.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take it that Jemilah's answer on expanding incinerator capacity, that the Viridor proposals for expansion in Beddington are covered by your assurance that the Mayor is just against expansion.
So we responded to the consultation.
To say no. OK. And now I'm going to move on finally to Assembly Member Best, who is going to wrap up with the last of our questions.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I just wanted to ask if anyone on the panel wanted to speak up to say that the Edmonton incinerator plans at the size and scale are justified. Maybe looking particularly at you, Matthew, but does anybody want to say that the size and scale of that plan was justified?
As I said earlier, I'm here representing Islington Council. It is necessary to have a new facility. There's a dilemma in terms of making sure that NLWA fulfil its statutory responsibilities to manage all of its waste going forward, whilst at the same time wanting to make assumptions about, waste arisings going down and the impact of our efforts to reduce waste arisings. It's a really difficult decision, to be honest, and I wouldn't want to call it either way.
Okay, so I'm glad you have a literal representative from Islington talking about something that is spiraled to billions of pounds, and we're not sure, but we're just going to build it anyway. It's just absolutely crazy. So,
sorry, can I clarify? I'm not involved in the decision-making process, and I'm not trying to separate myself out from it. It's because I haven't got the insight and the knowledge.
I would think that it's something that is, if we've gone forward with, coming from Islington Council in your background, you'd be able to say dead on that was the right plan and it's correct.
I mean,
the
there's
fact
a
that you
series
can't
of
say that, it's not against, it's nothing on. It shows the serious flaws of the plan that you can't stand there with good conscience and just say 100% this is the right thing to do.
I think it shows the difficulty of the environment that we're working in. There's a series of robust arguments and business cases, and it's gone through planning at multiple levels, and the outcome is that NLWA are moving forward with this. But it's not something that is simply, is it right or wrong? There are a number of arguments for and against, and NLWA and the constituent members have to make a judgment about the right way forward, taking into account the risks and the opportunities and the pros and cons, and that's the decision they've made.
I think it's quite clear it's wrong, but so what happens when the whole entire district, that's the new builds are being built to be supported by this heat network, and then then we don't burn enough rubbish and we have to import it, because we already import rubbish at Edmonton Incinerator. What happens when we have to import more rubbish from outside in order to, and I think just to say, Matthew, so you have some context, you get to say this from supporting Islington residents. I support Waltham Forest residents who have the biggest plumes from this incinerator sitting on their house every day.
I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that, but it sounds like from on a regional basis in London, it sounds like there's plenty of waste in West London that needs to be managed somewhere. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that.
Okay. I think, and have you looked in at all to the fact that the Edmonton incinerator is built around, obviously, the Copenhagen model, which has been now dubbed a fiasco?
No, I have not.
Okay.
I can't speak for the NLWA.
Okay. And just to open up as well, does anybody want to comment on what more the Mayor can do to decrease further and to decrease incineration further and ensure that everything possible is reused or recycled?
I think it just goes back to the fact that the Mayor has been really clear that we oppose further incineration capacity, and I think your point on Edmonton should be that that was approved, but since then we've had expansion in other incinerators and increases in things. So we shouldn't be looking to expand capacity if we think that there's a risk that the existing capacity is enough, and we, as I said, don't want to be importing waste into London to be burnt.
And how is incineration reflected in the RRP plans?
So I think the RRPs are built around moving waste up the waste hierarchy, and when we're reviewing contracts and strategies, that is what we kind of encourage boroughs and waste authorities to base their programmes around.
Thank you. And I think it's good the Mayor's spoken out against incineration. It's a shame the Labour boroughs in North East London haven't supported him.
Well, we could just as easily say that, Bexley should have been against the expansion that Corey got through at DCO. I mean, I don't think it's linked to the political control of boroughs. I think there has been, energy from waste facilities in Lib Dem, Labour controlled, all the rest of it.
I think if you, I'll repeat the statements again. I said
the DCO is signed off by a Conservative government, Emma. So
if you read back through the statement I just said, I said it's good the Mayor has been supportive. Last time I checked, he was a Labour Mayor. And I was just pointing out that the Labour boroughs, which I think you'll agree are all Labour boroughs in North East London, are against it. I think that was a pretty fair statement. But if you want to talk about Bexley, we'll talk about the fact that Bexley is Conservative-led and has the best recycling in London.
But it's also just approved an incinerator. So I don't think we can link development of energy from waste to political control or political the government or regional authorities. Anyway, that brings our discussion to a close, and we've got no time at all for anything else, but I am going to thank all of our guests for their insights, which have been really interesting and very valuable. Thank you very much for coming along. We have got a few more items of business, which will probably take us about 3 minutes to do. Please feel free to stay and listen to that, or should you feel the need to leave, please feel free to leave. Could I ask the committee to note the report that was issued to us and the discussion that we've just had?
Noted.
Could I also request that the committee delegate authority to me as the chair, in conjunction with the party group lead members, to agree any outputs arising from the discussion today?
Agreed.
Thank you. The Environment Committee work programme is on pages 83 to 86 of your agenda pack. Can I ask the committee to note the programme?
Noted.
And also the additional activity undertaken since the last meeting, namely the site visit to the Mogden sewage treatment works, where we were able to see both aerobic and anaerobic digestion on site. Was that noted? Thank you. The date of our next meeting is going to be the delightful date of the 20th of December. We weren't able to secure the 25th, obviously. And that'll be 10 o'clock in this very place. Any other business which I consider to be urgent? There is none. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.